Chapter 735. Outside the manor, a black man, a Native American, and an Asian man got out of the car slowly. All of them were extraordinary humans from a Silver Shield company. Other than one person who had stayed behind to oversee the company, all of them had rushed here under White Lion's call. The black man had a head full of pigtails and was wearing leather clothes and sunglasses. He looked just like a rapper. He shook his neck a little impatiently and said, "What the hell? To think that all of us have to come together. Do any of you know what's going on?" The Native American was wearing ordinary sportswear. His gaze was indifferent as he said, "I heard that there's an extraordinary human. He's very strong, and the three of us have to join forces to deal with him." "Very strong? How strong?" The Asian man, who was wearing a loose t-shirt and baggy pants, said while chewing on bubble gum, "I still need to rush back to play my game. Let's settle this quickly." The Asian man then took the lead and headed in the direction of the manor. The three of them were all experts who possessed systems and extraordinary abilities. In ancient times, they would be existences who could take on 10,000 people. Even in the modern era, they were still undeniably extraordinary people. All of them were being nurtured by the Silver Shield Company at a high price, and they would only be mobilized when there were special situations. They were extremely arrogant existences. However, the moment they stepped into the manor, an intense pressure descended from the sky and encompassed them. It was as if there was a hand grabbing tightly onto their hearts, making them unable to move. "What is this?" The trio's countenances changed drastically. At the next moment, they discovered to their astonishment that they had lost control of their physical bodies. Waves of power were transmitted from the air as if someone was grabbing onto their physical bodies and controlling them to move forward. Not long later, three extraordinary humans with distorted expressions and eyes filled with terror slowly walked over to the lawn. White Lion threw a glance at them and shouted, "You guys are here. Come over here." However, when he saw that the three of them were standing there without moving, he was stunned for a moment. He walked up and discovered that their physical bodies were not moving. However, their eyes were darting around, revealing an intense sense of panic. "You guys can't move?" Seeing the three of them blink fiercely, White Lion gasped. He had thought that even if they could not deal with Feng Xingjian, they would still be able to retreat unscathed after gathering the powers of a few extraordinary humans. Who would have thought that the three of them would lose without even seeing each other face to face? Moreover, they lost without any reason. They couldn't even figure out how they got hit. At this moment, White Lion looked at Feng Xingjian's back with an extremely solemn expression. Ignoring the four superhumans watching from the sidelines, Feng Xingjian continued to guide Catherine, Linda, and Jack in their sword practice. He also injected some physical particles into Jack's body to observe the changes in the trio's bodies. As they continued to practice their nurturing sword techniques, Feng Xingjian could sense that the bodies of the three of them were going through tremendous changes with every passing moment, gradually changing from human bodies to those of Miracle World. This was especially so because Catherine had the fitness system. This system had been helping Catherine in her cultivation, making her cultivation more effective. She could even directly absorb energy from ether particles to strengthen her physical body. This was an ability that could only be obtained after the first transition. However, Catherine had managed to do it in advance with the help of the system. Interesting. Feng Xingjian sensed the operation of the system in Catherine's body. If I can understand the principles behind the operation of these systems, will I be able to understand the principles behind the stats window on me as well? Miracle World stats window, skills synthesis, ether synchronization rate, and other functions are also a type of system. Therefore, Feng Xingjian looked at Jack and Linda and thought, if I can combine the abilities of their systems to create a set of sword techniques for them, I'll be able to understand the operation of their systems better. Feng Xingjian suddenly understood. If he could gather various extraordinary humans and understand the principles behind the various systems, while guiding Catherine to become a knight, he would be able to gain a deeper understanding of Miracle World's knight cultivation system. Therefore, he threw a glance toward White Lion and the other three extraordinary humans, smiled, and said, "Do the four of you want to learn sword arts?" The other three were stunned for a moment, but White Lion immediately dropped to his knees, lowered his head, and said, "It's our honor to be able to learn sword arts under you." Therefore, over the next few days, Fang Xingjian brought the four of them to cultivate their sword arts, paying no attention to the matters in the outside world. Just as the four of them were cultivating, an intense conflict broke out between the Gambino family in the United States and the Douglas family, which Catherine was from. Within a short period of time, the sharp Fang troops under the Gambino family attacked from all directions and killed over 20 important members of the Douglas family. This indirectly resulted in a loss of over $100 million, and even the entire Douglas family's business was affected. Be **starred. Are these people crazy? Diana smashed her fist onto the office table, appearing infuriated. They won't have a good ending if they fight against us so wantonly. Could it be that they want both sides to suffer great losses? Although the wealthy families in the United States had their own armed forces, none of them would be so foolish as to fight against each other in the United States. Most of them would play around with authority, rules, and money. Moreover, they had always stopped at the right time and would not be so ruthless toward other wealthy families. It seems to be because the Gambino family has changed their leader. Jessica, who was one of Diana's subordinates, said, "A person by the name of Tom has replaced the previous foreign and become the person in charge of the Gambino family. He has sent out the Fang troop, and there are many more extraordinary humans among them. We're being pushed back. Where's the police? Where's the FBI? And where's the law enforcing department? Where the hell have they gone?" Diana said furiously. The United States also had its own department that managed extraordinary humans. It was called the Law Enforcing Department. This was also one of the reasons why the various large families did not act recklessly, even though they recruited extraordinary humans. Diana could not understand how crazy the Gambino family could be for them to disregard the rules and act recklessly. The female secretary shook her head and said, "They killed the police and the FBI's people. Without extraordinary humans, there's no way they can go up against the sharp Fang troops. As for the people from the law enforcing department, I don't know why, but they didn't make a move. This lunatic." Hearing that the Gambino family had killed the police and the FBI's people, Diana shook her head, thinking that they had completely lost their rationality. However, the Douglas family could not die together with these lunatics. Diana asked again, "Then what about the Silver Shields people? What about White Lion and the others? Why didn't they make a move?" The female secretary threw a glance at Diana. Diana's enraged look was too terrifying, making her feel as if there was a raging storm. Other than legend, White Lion and the other three have all disappeared. Their phones are switched off, and we can't find them anywhere. Chapter 736. In the Silver Shield's headquarters, amidst deafening sounds, streams of black smoke kept on bursting out from within the building. Gunshots and sounds of killing rang out incessantly. Many black shadows flashed past the corridors at a speed that surpassed the limits of humans. Even the Silver Shield Company's highly trained gunmen found it hard to hit them. Even if they managed to hit them, they seemed to be unable to affect their movements. From time to time, a gunman would be knocked down to the ground by the black shadows. Following that, streams of blood would explode along with agonizing cries. Kacha-kacha sounds rang out, and a black shadow lifted its head from the corpse, revealing a green face and fangs, as well as a body with the head of a wolf. The gunman's corpse under it had long since been torn into pieces. The werewolf stuck out its blood-red tongue and licked its lips. A surge of wild emotions burned in its chest. The werewolf raised its head, looked toward the sky, and let out a long howl. Following this long howl, the undulating howls of wolves rang out throughout the building. It was as if they had come from a modern city to a grassland. At the top of the building, a man with long platinum-colored hair stood there while holding a golden longsword. He was panting intensely, and fresh blood would occasionally seep out from his forehead, back, and calves. In front of him was a giant wolf with black fur all over its body. The giant wolf was more than 3 meters tall, and its entire body was covered in muscles that were as majestic as marble. Its long claws were like daggers, lightly scratching the ground, leaving white marks. He grinned, looked at the man before him, and said, "Legend, are you still not going to surrender? Submit to my lord, and you'll share the authority to rule over the world in the future." The person holding the golden longsword was the last extraordinary human from the Silver Shield Company, Legend. He was an extraordinary human who possessed the mythical item exchange system. He could absorb love points in the midst of being in a relationship and use the love points to increase the authority of the system, allowing him to exchange for various legendary mythical weapons. However, it was a pity that Legend was a very devoted man. This caused him to only be able to obtain points from his lover, causing his growth to be extremely slow. Clutching the victory sword in his hand tightly, Legend said coldly, "Fasa, you were originally just an ordinary person. Why did you turn into a werewolf? Why did the entire Tusk troop turn into werewolves? And where are the other extraordinary humans from the Tusk troop? Why didn't they come? Haha, are you here to scout for information? There's no harm in telling you a little." Ever since Werewolf Fasa had turned into a werewolf, he seemed to have gained a hint of arrogance. He said calmly, "The original extraordinary humans in the Fong were all killed because they were unwilling to submit to Master. If you're unwilling, I can only kill you now." As he spoke, he even bumped his sharp claws. At the next moment, the two of them collided fiercely. All sorts of flames, thunderbolts, and toxins were unleashed from the mythical fog. However, regardless of the injuries, Werewolf Fasa was able to recover in an instant, just like a cockroach that could not be killed. In particular, Fasa's physical body was extremely powerful, and each of his claws could create a strong gust of wind. His strength, speed, and physical strength were all above that of Mythical, causing Mythical to continuously retreat. Half an hour later, several tens of werewolves stood on the rooftop. Fasa grabbed Legend's neck with one hand and lifted him up into the air. Seeing that Legend was unable to move, a cruel smile appeared at the corner of his lips. How is it? Don't you transcendents usually look down on us? How about now? You guys are just a bunch of lucky people who obtain abilities by chance. You guys don't know how to fight at all. When we also obtain extraordinary powers, you guys won't be able to withstand a single blow." With a cautious sound, Fasa broke Legend's neck. Then he closed his eyes and sensed the seething power in his body. Extraordinary power. The power he had been yearning for a very long time had finally appeared in his body. He had initially been an ordinary retired soldier who had been receiving a half-dead salary from a security company. Later on, he had joined the Gambino clan's Fong troop, but he had also been living on the edge of a blade. He had been jealous of those transcendents many times and had dreamed of obtaining that terrifying power many times. And now, he had finally succeeded. Exhaling, many strands of his fur receded, and the fangs in his mouth retracted. Fasa had returned to his original human appearance. A subordinate handed him a phone. "Hello, Master, we've completed the mission. They're all trash who can't withstand a single blow," Fasa said as he nodded. Yes, understand." After hanging up the phone, one of his subordinates asked, "How was it, Chief? Where are we going next?" Fasa let out a cold laugh and said, "That old fart from the Douglas family is still using his connections with the law enforcing department, wanting to get the government to exert pressure on us to stop us. How could he know that even the law enforcing department has been shocked by Master's power? They can't wait to join forces, so how would they dare to stop us? The entire West Coast will become our territory." Then Fasa turned his head and said, "Douglas has a daughter, right? Where is she?" A short moment later, many black shadows scattered in all directions. Fasa looked at the bright moon in the sky and said with a cold smile, "You should be a little more obedient after kidnapping your only daughter, right?" 3 hours later, a private jet slowly came to a stop on the runway. The head of the Douglas family, Alan Douglas, got off the plane together with Diana. They had just gotten off when they saw a group of black-clothed men surrounding them. The bodyguards next to them were just about to make a move when they were dragged out by streams of black shadows that darted out. Amidst agonizing cries, they were turned into minced meat. Only one of the black-clothed men collided with a little girl. The black-clothed man was sent flying over 10 meters away and fell to the ground, spewing out a mouthful of blood. However, he wiped his mouth and stood up without a care. He looked at Alan, Douglas, Diana, and the little girl standing before them with a murderous expression. This little girl was the strongest, extraordinary human in the Douglas family. She was also Elena, who Alan had been bringing along to protect him all this while. Elena had a leveling up system that allowed her to continuously reach the divine level by killing humans and animals. Each time she leveled up, she would gain 5 attribute points, which could be added to her strength, agility, flexibility, endurance, and reaction. Through the Douglas family's incessant supply of animals for her to level up, she was already at level 40 and had added over 200 points into her attributes. Both her strength and agility were over 80 points, and she could be said to be a human-shaped tank. However, her full-powered attack earlier, which could turn a person into a lump of minced meat, was completely unscathed. Extraordinary human. The black-clothed man shook his head. Then at the next moment, he swelled up and turned into a werewolf that was over 3 meters tall. The over 10 black-clothed men next to him also transformed into a werewolf army amidst howls, surrounding Elena and the other two. Elena looked at this scene with a grim countenance. Alan's and Diana's countenances turned ghastly pale, and cold sweat kept breaking out on their heads. Diana shouted, "Have you guys gone mad? You guys are breaking the rules by attacking Alan in the airport. The law enforcing department won't let you off." Law enforcing department? The werewolf in the lead grinned and said, "The person in charge of the West Coast Law Enforcing Department is currently having tea with Master." Chapter 737. Hearing this, the countenances of Alan and the other two changed. The werewolf in the lead continued, "Alan Douglas, are you still going to hang on? If you join us now, Master will bestow upon you powers that surpass that of nature, an eternal lifespan, and endless wealth." Alan Douglas was an old Caucasian man who was about 60 years old. He had sparse blonde hair, and as the head of one of the richest families in the United States, he had been through many trials and tribulations. He was like an old but strong, ferocious tiger. Although he was surrounded by werewolves, his countenance was pale, and his heart was beating rapidly. He did not panic. He managed to calm himself down, looked at the monster, and said, "Don't act recklessly. We can talk about anything. If you kill me, neither you nor the Gambino family will benefit from it." As expected of a big boss who's afraid of death, the werewolf looked at Alan with a mocking expression and said, "Don't worry. As long as you cooperate well, not only will we not harm you, but Master will also bestow upon you benefits that you can't even imagine." Both Alan and Diana, who was next to him, had grim countenances. As celebrities in the upper class, when had they ever been threatened like this before? However, when faced with the other party's pure brute force, they had never been in such a sorry state before. At this moment, the wealth, authority, influence, and connections that they were usually proud of appeared pale and powerless in the face of brute force. Just as Alan and Diana were feeling uneasy, a phone suddenly rang out. The werewolf shrank and turned back into his human form. It was Fasa, the leader of this small werewolf team, who had fought against Legend on the rooftop of the building. After turning back into his human form, he picked up the cell phone in his pants pocket. Their pants were clearly custom-made elastic pants that could still wrap around their bodies after transforming and would not tear apart. Looking at the caller ID, the werewolf smiled and said, "Mr. Allen, it seems that there's news from your daughter. What do you guys want?" Hearing this, Alan Douglas said angrily, "I can promise you anything, just don't hurt my daughter." At the thought of Catherine, he felt worried. Although he had been calling and sending emails to her ever since the war with the Gambino family started, he had not received any reply from Catherine. He could not help but think, could it be that she was captured by these werewolves? Although Catherine's physique was also very powerful, and she was also an extraordinary human with a system. How could she be a match for these werewolf monsters? At the thought of this, Alan Douglas looked at Fossa with eyes filled with murderous intent. "Don't worry, I didn't let anyone hurt her." Fossa shrugged. "It's just in case. I was afraid that you'd be too stubborn, so I sent someone to fetch Miss Catherine over. They're probably on their way now." Then Fossa picked up the phone and said hello. However, not long after he picked up the call, Fossa's expression changed drastically. His eyes burned with fury. "Say that again." 15 minutes ago, outside Catherine's manor. "We found her." "Understood. We will bring her back in a moment." After hanging up the phone, Faye sniffed and smiled. "They're inside. Go in, capture them, and kill all of them except for Catherine." As he spoke, Faye and the 5 people behind him started to transform at the same time. The shirts and suits on their upper bodies were instantly torn apart, and their muscles bulged out. Thick brown and black wolf fur grew out, and the 6 of them instantly turned into werewolves that were 5 meters tall. Although they did not appear as muscular as Fossa, they still possessed strength, speed, and recovery abilities that far surpassed that of humans. With a few leaps, the 6 werewolves dashed toward the manor like black lightning bolts. They twitched their noses, and the muscles on their legs expanded and contracted, unleashing explosive powers. 1 minute later, they arrived at the lawn, following the scent. A total of 7 people, Catherine, Linda, Jack, White Lion, and the others, were floating in midair. Their eyes were closed tightly, as if they were in a deep sleep. In their dreams, they were cultivating their sword techniques over and over again. As they cultivated in their dreams, their physical bodies also showed similar physical reactions. It could be said that they appeared to be sleeping, but they were actually cultivating very efficiently. This was especially so in their dreams, where they would be even more focused in their cultivation. Every minute and second felt like a few days or months, and the effects of their cultivation were outstanding. This method of cultivating in their dreams was naturally arranged by Feng Xingjian. This would make it easier for him to observe the reactions of the various systems during their cultivation, and it would also increase the efficiency of Catherine and the others' cultivation. Right now, he was continuously channeling cultivation information into them through his martial will. At the sight of this scene, Faye and the other 5 werewolves instantly felt a little surprised and bewildered. Faye looked at Feng Xingjian and asked, "Who are you? What are you doing?" Sensing the arrival of the 6 werewolves, Feng Xingjian did not look at them. He only scanned them with his martial will and understood their background. Aren't they extraordinary humans who have systems and have only been bestowed with extraordinary powers? Feng Xingjian could not be bothered to say much to them. He tapped White Lion's forehead with a finger. In that instant, White Lion seemed to have been pierced by a sword, and he woke up with a cry. "Teacher, the past few days of cultivation had made White Lion and the others feel great admiration for Feng Xingjian. He was like a bottomless ocean. The effects of the cultivation also made White Lion secretly astonished. He could sense that the various attributes of his body had improved, and it was a qualitative leap. Feng Xingjian threw him a nonchalant glance and said, "Kill them all, and then capture their boss." After saying that, he no longer looked at White Lion and the 6 werewolves. Instead, he focused on the few people who were still cultivating in their dreams. The changes to their systems and the various reactions of the ether particles made Feng Xingjian extremely fascinated. When Faye and the other 5 werewolves heard Feng Xingjian's words, they were all enraged. "You're courting death." As they said that, they turned into 6 bolts of black lightning. 2 of them pounced toward White Lion, while the remaining 4 pounced toward Feng Xingjian. Impudent. Seeing that they were going to disturb Feng Xingjian, White Lion glared furiously, and streams of platinum sword cheese burst out from all over his body. He raised his hand and punched out, sending surging sword cheese gushing out like a laser beam. With 2 swoosh swoosh, 2 werewolves were slashed into 2. At the sight of this terrifying scene, The remaining 4 werewolves let out astonished cries and retreated several tens of meters, looking at White Lion in astonishment. White Lion also looked at his palm in disbelief. This continued until Fong Xingjian's voice rang out from behind him. "Why? Have you forgotten what I've taught you?" In that instant, everything he had learned in his dream appeared in his mind. White Lion mumbled, "This is my killing technique, Golden Slash." This was a sword technique that Fong Xingjian had created based on White Lion's metal evolution system. It was a killing technique that made use of White Lion's metal body and the electron migration to create plasma sword cheese. In Fong Xingjian's opinion, this small creation had completely unleashed the potential of White Lion's system. In his eyes, White Lion had lost his value. This was why he had sent White Lion out to kill his enemies and test out his prowess in actual combat. In White Lion's opinion, his battle prowess had improved by leaps and bounds. Kill them all. Hearing Fong Xingjian's instructions and looking at the 4 werewolves, White Lion let out a savage laugh and slashed out with his hand. A stream of platinum sword cheese tore through the atmosphere. The sword cheese that were like lasers were not something that flesh and blood could fend off. Furthermore, it was as agile as a small snake as it slithered to and fro. In the blink of an eye, there was only a flash of white light, and the heads of the 4 werewolves flew up into the sky. Chapter 738. After killing 6 werewolves instantly with a golden slash, White Lion was stunned for a moment. "This is bad. I forgot to leave them alive." He immediately searched the werewolves' bodies, but did not manage to find any identity information. All he found was a cell phone. White Lion switched on the cell phone and looked at the call history. Then he made a call. After the other party picked up the call, he asked, "Hello? Is this on Faye? Have you caught Catherine?" White Lion smiled. "If you're talking about those 6 puppies, I've already killed them." Fossa frowned, and his gaze turned cold. "Who are you?" "Silver Shield, White Lion." "Silver Shield's surviving members? You have no idea who you've offended. I swear, no matter where you flee to, no matter who is protecting you, our Gambino family will." Before Fossa could finish his words, White Lion had already hung up. White Lion's attitude made Fossa feel even more infuriated, and he crushed the cell phone in his hand. Alan Douglas asked, "What's wrong? How's Catherine?" Fossa threw a glance at this American magnate and said calmly, "Take them away." Although he was furious that White Lion had killed his subordinates, even if the Silver Shield still had a few extraordinary humans left, it would only be a minor problem. Right now, his most important mission was to bring Alan Douglas back to the Gambino family and hasten the process of taking over the Douglas family's wealth. At that time, with the Gambino family's power expanding once again, the number of werewolves under his master would increase once again. He might even be able to advance from a 4th-generation werewolf to a 3rd-generation werewolf, possessing even greater power. At the thought of this, his eyes narrowed slightly, and he got his subordinates to bring Douglas to one of the Gambino family's manor on the West Coast. In a manor on the West Coast, 2 Caucasian men, one old and one young, were sitting opposite each other. A game of chess was placed before them, and the 2 of them stared at it without blinking. A short moment later, the old man lifted his head and smiled bitterly. "Jefferson, your standards are getting better and better." The young man called Jefferson smiled and said, "Mr. Fitch, how do you feel now?" "How do I feel?" Fitch took a deep breath, feeling how strong and strong his body, which had been old and decrepit to begin with, was now. Under his aged appearance, he could feel that his muscles and internal organs were even healthier than when he was in university. "I've never felt so good before." Fitch used to be a high-ranking officer in the FBI. Ever since the emergence of supernatural powers 30 years ago, he was sent to the law enforcement department to be in charge of supernatural affairs. After so many years of ups and downs, although he was still immortal, he had become the person in charge of the West Coast Law Enforcement Department. He could be said to be a high-ranking official, but no matter how much power and wealth he had, he couldn't buy back his lost youth. A week ago, his body deteriorated rapidly. His internal organs were failing, and he was on the verge of death. It was at this moment that the new leader of the Gambino family, Tom, appeared before him and turned him into a werewolf. Since then, his physical body had once again regained its health. In fact, it was even healthier than it had been in his youth. For these old people who had grasped wealth and power, there was nothing more desirable than regaining their youth. That's good. Hearing Fitch's words, young Jefferson smiled as well. Then I'll leave the rest to you. Don't worry. Old Fitch broke into a smile of one of his own. In the following period of time, he would introduce the high-ranking officials from the law enforcement department and the various government departments in the West Coast to Tom, bewitching them one by one into becoming werewolves. He believed that with the temptation of a longer lifespan and extraordinary powers, this would be a piece of cake. It would not just be the West Coast. When the time came, the FBI, the Department of Defense, the Congress, and even the President might all join in. The entire United States would welcome a new era. Just then, a subordinate dressed in a black suit walked in, leaned over to young Jefferson, and said, "Sir, Fossa and the others have brought Allen back." Jefferson's eyes lit up, and after a series of attacks, he finally managed to capture Allen Douglas. Allen's wealth and connections were what his master desperately needed. Bring them over. A short moment later, Allen Douglas, Diana, Elena, and the others walked over. Looking at Jefferson and Fitch, Allen's countenance turned grim. Clearly, he had not expected that Fitch, a high-ranking official from the law enforcing department, would be so close to the Gambino family. Allen could not understand why a high-ranking official from the law enforcing department would hold the Gambino family in such high regard, even allowing them to do so many crazy things. Fitch smiled and did not say anything. He looked at Allen as if he was looking at a clown. However, Jefferson shrugged, and in that instant, he swelled up, turning into a huge silver wolf that was over 4 meters tall. The muscles all over the huge wolf's body were like pieces of rock, and its sharp teeth gleamed with an astonishing cold gleam. Although it did not do anything to attack and merely stood there, it was like a ferocious beast. Everyone present felt their mouths go dry, and they had the misconception that their lives were in the hands of the other party. Jefferson, who had turned into a huge silver wolf, said, "Allen Douglas, do you want to know why our Gambino family is able to defeat you? Why is the law enforcing department unwilling to touch us? I can tell you that the reason is very simple." Chapter 739. On the lawn outside the manor. When the two werewolves saw a white lion, who had barged in, they grinned savagely. "Kid, you're courting death." The other werewolf licked his lips and said, "I'm going to rip open his intestines." After obtaining the werewolves' powers, ordinary humans were no match for them at all with their superhuman strength, speed, and terrifying recovery abilities. This had also nurtured the pride of these werewolves. Hearing the words of the two werewolves, White Lion let out a cold laugh and continued to walk forward without saying a word. The two werewolves charged over while howling. However, they had just gotten close when their heads were slashed off by platinum sword cheese under their astonished gazes, turning into two headless corpses that dropped onto the ground. Even more werewolves surged out, but White Lion did not seem to be panicking at all. He went against the pack of wolves, leaving behind a trail of broken corpses wherever he passed by. In the corridor and in the air, streams of white sword cheese shot out. Wherever they passed by, it was as if they had been slashed by lasers. Steel plates, mud walls, and wood were all slashed apart. It was White Lion who was performing the golden slash. Streams of platinum-colored sword cheese surrounded his entire body, occasionally shooting out with a single thought from him. They pierced through any reinforced concrete and killed the werewolves in the distance. Roar! The two fourth-generation werewolves bellowed furiously, and their fangs extended out. They turned into two whirlwinds and charged out. Their prowess and power were so terrifying that they could overturn a container truck. However, such power and speed were of little use against the golden slash. White Lion glared, and with a sweep of platinum sword cheese, the two fourth-generation werewolves were slashed into minced meat. Amidst the shocked cries, the werewolves started to retreat. At the sight of this, White Lion broke into a cold smile. He sensed the waves of power in his body and revealed an extremely satisfied expression. Quickly get rid of them. I still need to go back and cultivate with teacher. At the thought of this, he stomped hard with his feet and started to accelerate. Fang Xingjian's cultivation had not only bestowed him with the golden/killing technique, but it had also allowed him to possess a physical attribute that far surpassed what he had been in the past. Every step he took on the cement ground would cause it to explode, creating a huge crater. He accelerated like a rocket, and in the blink of an eye, he had already caught up to the fleeing werewolf. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Under the terrified gazes of the werewolves, sword chi shot out and tore their bodies apart. No matter how powerful they were or how fast they were as vulnerable as clay before the platinum sword chi. Fang Xingjian chased them all the way to a hall and saw several tens of werewolves waiting there. The young man in the lead was Jefferson. Alan Douglas, Diana, and Elena were beside him. However, when they saw White Lion appear surrounded by sword chis, everyone present revealed astonished expressions. Jefferson narrowed his eyes. You're the Silver Shield's White Lion? I didn't expect your strength to increase again, to actually rush to this place. Alan said, All right, White Lion, we've already reconciled with the Gambino family. You can stop now. The potential and power displayed by the Gambino family had already made Alan extremely astonished. The lifespan he would be able to obtain after becoming a werewolf made him very excited, and he planned on fully devoting himself to the Gambino family. Hearing that, White Lion tilted his head and said with a smile, I'm sorry, I'm not here for the Douglas family. It's just that teacher has orders to kill all these wolf cubs and capture their master. Arrogant. The 3 fifth-generation werewolves bellowed furiously and pounced forward. They were only over 20 meters away from White Lion and would be able to reach him in less than half a second. Clearly, the speed at which White Lion had barged in was too fast, and these werewolves still did not know about White Lion's earlier battle achievements. They had once killed policemen who were armed with guns at this distance, and most of them would not be able to react in time. Even if they managed to react and were shot a few times, it would be of no concern to the werewolves' recovery abilities. However, at the next moment, a white light flashed before their eyes, and with astonished gazes, the heads of the 3 werewolves flew up high. The 3 of them had turned into 3 headless corpses, slamming into the wall from the momentum of their charge and falling down. At the sight of this scene, both Alan and Diana were astonished. Since when did White Lion possess such battle prowess? And who was this teacher he was talking about? However, White Lion's sword attack had infuriated many of the werewolves present. Over 35th-generation werewolves and 54th-generation werewolves pounced forth. Violent powers tore through the air, and strong gales gushed forth, forming waves of air currents that shot out. It was as if a tempest had been created. This was especially so for the werewolf's ferocious aura. White Lion even felt that he could smell the fishy stench coming from the werewolf's mouth. Sensing this scene, Alan and Diana closed their eyes, as if they did not dare to watch the scene of White Lion being torn apart by the wolf pack. However, faced with this astonishing power, White Lion wore a disdainful expression. With a tap of his finger, platinum sword cheese turned into a sword net, encompassing toward the charging wolf pack. In that instant, it was as if streams of laser beams had swept through the air. Wherever they passed by, the wolf pack would be dismembered. Their muscles and bones were unable to put up any resistance against this terrifying sword cheese. Amidst a series of agonizing cries, more than half of the wolf pack died instantly. The remaining ones retreated frantically, looking at White Lion in horror. This was especially so for Fasa, who had captured Alan and the others. One of his arms had been slashed off by the sword cheese, and he was looking at White Lion with an astonished gaze. Hearing the astonished cries, Alan, Diana, and Elena all looked at White Lion in disbelief. To think that the insufferably arrogant wolf pack which had easily broken through the silver shield, had been defeated by White Lion just like that? White Lion definitely didn't have such an ability in the past, Elena said solemnly. He should only have a metal body. Alan Douglas said in astonishment, this ability that's similar to a light sword has a very strong destructive prowess. Diana did not say a word. However, when she thought of the teacher that White Lion had mentioned earlier, her eyes were filled with astonishment and doubt. Young Jefferson's gaze narrowed, and killing intent surged in his eyes. Although Tom could turn humans into werewolves, he could at most produce 2 fifth-generation werewolves every day. It would take 3 days for a 4th-generation werewolf to appear, 7 days for a 3rd-generation werewolf, and 1 month for a 2nd-generation werewolf to appear. Each one of them was an extremely precious power. How could he not be enraged at the sight of White Lion's massacre? Amidst a bestial roar, Jefferson turned into a huge silver-white wolf and said in a cold voice, I'll only ask one last time. Surrender or die. White Lion could not be bothered to reply. He raised his hand and slashed out a stream of platinum sword cheese. However, this time around, things did not go as smoothly. The sword cheese only slashed onto Jefferson's afterimage. At the next moment, a claw shadow tore through the air and appeared behind White Lion. Chapter 740. Sparks splattered, and White Lion almost brushed against his opponent's claws as he dodged. Even so, 3 white marks were left behind by the air shock waves. It was as if a sword had slashed onto a steel plate. White Lion's gaze narrowed. The toughness of his body was almost equivalent to that of a tank's motherboard, yet his opponent was still able to leave white marks across space. How terrifying was his attack prowess! However, he had just dodged the first attack when a silver-white wolf silhouette once again appeared behind him. Like a white ghost, the wolf clawed out once again. Puff sounds rang out, and this time around, White Lion was caught firmly by the claw. Amidst the splattering of blood, a stream of platinum sword chi burst out abruptly and slashed onto Jefferson's body, piercing through his chest and almost slashing the huge wolf into 2 at the waist. Retreating several meters, White Lion looked at his waist. It was a bloody mess. What sharp claws! To think that they can tear my body apart. At the sight of this scene, a gleam flashed in Alan's and Diana's eyes. They could not help but think that if they had not been summoned to surrender, but had been able to subdue this werewolf influence. However, in the next moment, under everyone's horrified gazes, a string of granulation suddenly burst out from the white wolf's wound. The granulation linked together and instantly reconnected the huge wolf's body. In less than a second, Jefferson had already recovered from his injuries. White Lion's brows twitched, and his eyes revealed astonishment. What a terrifying recovery ability. He immediately slashed out with his sword, and sword cheese surged out, turning into a sword net that encompassed out toward the huge wolf. This time around, the huge wolf once again displayed its astonishing speed. Like a phantom, it bypassed the sword net and darted toward White Lion. In that instant, the 2 of them were locked in a stalemate. Both White Lion and Jefferson possessed powerful offensive and defensive prowess. Both of them were wary of each other's attacking means and did not dare to receive their attacks head-on. However, they were able to use their own attacks to force the other party to retreat. As they fought, sword light and strong gales gushed out. Amidst the series of afterimages, almost no one could see the duo's movements clearly. As the sword light and claw shadows swept out, many werewolves started to panic. Retreat quickly! Everyone was shocked and started to retreat toward the hall's entrance. What's going on? A shout rang out. It turned out that Fitch from the Enforcer Department had heard the sounds of battle and walked over. When he saw the situation in the hall, he was shocked. What's going on? Who was that person? He had seen Jefferson's combat power with his own eyes. Jefferson could even tear apart a tank, and was an existence that could face a modern army head-on. Yet, there was actually someone who could fight back and forth with him. Alan Douglas also stood at the side in amazement. It seemed that he did not expect the extraordinaire he had recruited to be so powerful. Simultaneously, more and more werewolves surrounded them. Other than those who had been sent out and those who had died in battle, there were still over 130 werewolves guarding the manor. All of them surrounded the hall and were extremely astonished to see the scene of White Lion fighting Jefferson. It was not that they had not encountered supernatural beings before, but it was already extremely difficult for a normal supernatural being to go up against a fourth-generation werewolf. Against a third-generation werewolf, they were often powerless to fight back. As for a second-generation werewolf, there were existences that could even go up against an army. But now, they were also stopped by someone. Fitch's countenance was grim. In his memories, only certain monsters in the top secret files of the Enforcer Department would be able to do this. This was not a world that a regional person in charge like him could understand. In fact, a regional person in charge like him and the Gambino family's werewolves had too little understanding of the extraordinary powers in this world. After all, they were not at the top of the social hierarchy and knew nothing about the secrets that could affect the world's structure and change human society. Seeing that Jefferson was unable to take down the other party, even after a long time, another man and an old man let out a bellow and turned into two huge silver-white wolves. Jefferson, don't waste time. Let's deal with him together. As the three huge wolves attacked at the same time, the pressure on White Lion suddenly increased by over 10 times. For a moment, he was in a difficult position, and blood appeared all over his body. Occasionally, his flesh would be clawed off by the other party's claws. In the end, one of the huge wolves bit down on his neck, and another bit down on his arm. Then Jefferson tore open their chests with one claw and reached in with his claws. White Lion suddenly erupted, and 10 streams of platinum sword cheese shot out from all over his body, slashing the three huge wolves. However, even though he had instantly slashed off the three huge wolves' necks, arms, chests, and waists, the three huge wolves did not move at all. At the next moment, their injuries recovered, displaying their terrifying regenerative abilities. At the sight of this scene, the many werewolves cheered in unison. However, the countenances of Alan, Diana, and the others turned grim. 3 werewolves who could tear apart tanks and were almost undying were too terrifying. If this power were to continue growing day by day, wouldn't humanity be ruled by them? With a puff, White Lion spat out a mouthful of blood and looked at the 3 huge wolves with an unresigned expression. If it wasn't because the 3 of you joined forces, you wouldn't have been able to defeat me. We can give birth to a new comrade every month, but what about you guys? The world is destined to be ruled by our race, one of the huge wolves said in disdain. White Lion looked coldly at the 3 huge wolves and said, "Teacher will avenge me and kill all of you." Your teacher? If he comes, we'll still tear him into pieces. Jefferson let out a cold laugh in disdain. As he spoke, Jefferson was about to crush White Lion's internal organs. However, at the next moment, light burst out from White Lion's body, and a faint phantom image appeared on his body. It was a stream of sword intent that Feng Xingjian had left in White Lion's body. It usually recorded his battle data and would be unleashed when White Lion's life was in danger. Seeing the human-shaped phantom image, White Lion smiled. "Teacher." A hint of warning flashed in the hearts of the 3 huge wolves, and they retreated over 10 meters back, surrounding the phantom image and White Lion. Alan and the others frowned, not knowing what had happened. However, Diana stared closely at the phantom image and let out a cry at the next moment. "Isn't this the Feng Xingjian who taught Catherine sword arts? Why is it him?" Moreover, White Lion is calling him teacher. After Feng Xingjian threw a glance at White Lion, he frowned slightly. Then he looked at the 3 huge wolves and said calmly, "So there's someone of a higher level? Who turned you guys into werewolves? Get him to come out and meet me." Jefferson let out a cold snort and said, "Who are you? Do you want to make an enemy out of our Gambino clan?" "Enemy?" Feng Xingjian said coldly. "You guys don't even have the right to be cannon fodder." As he spoke, Feng Xingjian took a step forward and punched out toward a huge wolf. Faced with these werewolves, he did not even bother to use his sword arts. However, to the many werewolves present, this punch was as if the world was collapsing. As Feng Xingjian punched out, It was as if a bomb had been ignited in the air. Shock waves exploded out in all directions with his fist as the center, and violent powers gushed out. Before his fist even came into contact with the huge wolf, the gushing shock waves had already smashed the huge wolf into dust. Over 100 werewolves were knocked unconscious by the air currents from this punch. It was as if they had been hit by a sonic bomb, and all of them fainted. Only Jefferson and the two huge silver wolves managed to withstand it with astonishing physiques. Alan, Diana, and Elena were unscathed under Fong Xingjian's intentional care. Alan and Diana looked at this scene in great astonishment. In their eyes, the huge silver wolf was already a top-notch, extraordinary human. However, Fong Xingjian had smashed it into minced meat with a single punch. What kind of terrifying power was this? Diana stared at this scene in a daze. Can extraordinary power be this strong? She had initially thought that although extraordinary powers were special, they were only comparable to handguns and machine guns. She had thought that they were just a type of weapon. However, this punch from Fong Xingjian had completely changed her understanding of them. The remaining two huge wolves also wore horrified expressions. Almost at the instant the air currents dissipated, they turned into two white bolts of lightning, dashing out toward the south and north respectively. They were going to escape. Do you think you can escape? With a flash, Fong Xingjian caught up to one of the huge wolves. Pressing down with his palm, he struck the wolf's head without holding back at all. In an instant, the huge wolf was like a firework that had been ignited. It started to explode from its head all the way to its tail. Its entire body turned into a splattering of blood. Following that, with another flash, Fong Xingjian caught up to Jefferson, who had fled over 100 meters away. With a light grab, Fong Xingjian lifted Jefferson up by the neck like he was lifting up a little chick. Jefferson let out an explosive bellow and bit out toward Fong Xingjian. However, as his mouth bit down on Fong Xingjian's neck, a loud bang rang out, and Jefferson's white teeth were shattered. His mouth was covered in blood as he looked at Fong Xingjian in terror. With the toughness of my bones, the strength of my biting, and the sharpness of my teeth, I can even tear apart a tank. How tough is his body? At this moment, Jefferson even started to suspect that with this person's toughness, even armor-piercing bullets would not be able to penetrate his defense. I just happen to be lacking a watchdog. I'll let you be the watchdog. However, with a light shake of his palm, Fong Xingjian dispelled the power on Jefferson's body. It was as if he was carrying a puppy. Under everyone's shocked and terrified gazes, Fong Xingjian slowly walked back to the hall. Chapter 741. The person who was the most astonished amongst everyone present was probably Diana. She had initially thought that Fong Xingjian was just an ordinary, extraordinary human. However, the powers he displayed had completely shattered her common sense. Sword arts? How is this sword arts? How can it possibly be sword arts? White Lion had already witnessed Fong Xingjian's powers. However, when he saw how Fong Xingjian had dealt with a white-headed werewolf with just 2 punches and a grab, as well as 3 huge wolves who could tear apart tanks and demolish buildings like toys, White Lion still felt astonished. He endured the pain and stood up respectfully. "Teacher, I'm sorry. I wasn't able to wipe them all out and cause you to come here as well." However, Fong Xingjian casually tossed Jefferson onto the ground and said calmly, "I merely used a hint of sword intent to attach to you." Hearing Fong Xingjian's words, everyone present trembled slightly. As they spoke, Fong Xingjian's martial will scanned through the entire manor, but he did not discover anyone else. Looking at Jefferson, whose mouth was covered in blood, Fong Xingjian asked curiously, "Where's the guy who turned the werewolves into werewolves? Where is he? Master isn't here." Jefferson continued to look at Fong Xingjian with an arrogant expression. "You've killed so many werewolves, and all of them are Master's blood and sweat. Master won't let you off." He stared at Fong Xingjian. Although he was astonished by Fong Xingjian's battle prowess, he still put on a strong front. "Not here." Fong Xingjian frowned and turned to look at Diana, Alan Douglas, and Elena. He said calmly, "In the future, Douglas will belong to me. However, you guys will be in charge of the specific matters. I'm not interested in how to manage it. You guys will also take over the Gambino family, and the power and wealth of the entire organization will belong to you. I don't want any of it. However, once I mention the things I want, you guys must hand them over to me." A sword-like gaze swept over the three of them, and a majestic aura like that of a god or demon from the nine heavens assaulted them. Although the words sounded extremely indifferent, Alan was unable to summon any will to resist. His face turned pale, and he immediately nodded and said, "I'll remember Master's words. From today onward, our Douglas family will serve Master with all our might. As long as we can satisfy your wish, we won't hesitate even if we have to use up all our wealth." As Alan Douglas spoke, his eyes were burning with passion. The power displayed by Feng Xinjian was too terrifying. Moreover, White Lion seemed to have improved tremendously after receiving Alan Douglas' guidance. It would be foolish not to cling on as such a powerful person. In particular, the Gambino family's matter today had taught him a good lesson. Compared to wealth and authority, power was the ultimate means that determined everything. Of course, this was under the condition that one had enough extraordinary power. Ordinary people would not be able to fight against it, even if they had billions of wealth. Alan's gaze flickered as he thought excitedly. With him supporting the Douglas family, our family will have the capital to rise up. It might not be impossible for us to become the #1 family in the United States. Diana looked at all of this in astonishment. Although the Douglas family was not one of the wealthiest families in the United States, they had a 100-year legacy and were a real estate tycoon for several decades. They had over $100 billion worth of assets, several tens of real estate projects, over 10 financial companies, and over 10,000 employees. To think that such a tremendous amount of wealth had been taken away by Feng Xinjian with just a few words. Diana's gaze as she looked at Feng Xinjian was filled with splendor. Is this what makes power so great? With just one person, he can go up against all power and wealth. However, Feng Xinjian did not continue asking about it after that. After all, no matter how much wealth the Douglas family had, how could they possibly be of any importance to him? He was only subduing them for the sake of making it easier for him to take action later on. Feng Xinjian then looked at the person in charge of the West Coast Law Enforcement Department and grabbed Fitch. He's someone from the United States Law Enforcement Department, the official in charge of managing extraordinary powers. Alan nodded and said, "That's him." Feng Xinjian nodded. It just so happened that he needed to gather information on this. "I'll be taking this person and this puppy with me. White Lion will help you with some matters from now on. You guys can deal with the remaining werewolves. As for the first mission I'm giving you, it's to find that extraordinary human who created the werewolves." After saying that, Feng Xinjian turned to leave. "Oh, right." Feng Xinjian then turned to look at Elena. Under his gaze, this young girl could not help but take a few steps back like a timid young beast. However, Feng Xinjian smiled and said, "You're very talented. Come over to my place tomorrow to learn sword arts." After saying that, he grabbed Fitch and Jefferson and left. With a slight leap, he knocked through the roof with a loud bang. Then his body paused for a moment, and with a dash, he instantly broke through the sound barrier. Bringing along a series of thunderous sounds, he cut across the cloud layers and disappeared into the horizon. Just the astonishing prowess of his departure alone made everyone present admire him once again. Feng Xinjian flew back to the manor at high speed and knocked out the huge wolf with a single thought. Then Feng Xinjian tapped out with a finger, and Fitch gradually woke up. Looking at Feng Xinjian, Fitch revealed a horrified expression. "What are you trying to do?" "I'm a government official of the United States. You can't kill me," Feng Xinjian said calmly. "All right, tell me what's going on with the law enforcing department." In a small town thousands of kilometers away from the West Coast, a bespectacled young man with a head of neatly combed short hair and a suit sat in front of a desk, watching a video on his laptop in silence. The video was the battle scene in the Gambino clan's manor. Judging from the angle from which it was shot, it was clearly recorded by various surveillance cameras. When a young man saw the battle between White Lion and the huge Wolf Jefferson, he only frowned slightly. However, when Fang Xingjian suddenly appeared, killed over 100 werewolves instantly, and defeated 3 huge wolves instantly, his pupils constricted and his expression turned grim. Amazing. To think that he can instantly defeat 3 second-generation huge wolves. However, at the next moment, he stood up and headed out the door with a cold smile on his face. I didn't expect that there to be such a powerful, extraordinary human in this world other than me. He walked to an empty space in the town and saw that there were corpses everywhere. It was as if the town had turned into a ghost town. Even though I've completed the system upgrade, I might still be a little weaker than you. But when I upgrade the wolf god system again. As he spoke, faint wolf howls rang out in the surroundings, and many wolf shadows appeared in void space. They were the ghost wolves that he had just summoned. They could traverse void space like ghosts and were formless and immaterial. At crucial moments, they could take on a physical form and attack. Each of them was harder to deal with than the second-generation werewolves. When I upgrade the system again, I'll take back what you owe me one by one. At the next moment, several hundred wolf howls rang out, and several hundred ghost wolves appeared around the young man. It was as if hell had descended, and the mortal world had turned into the netherworld. This young man was Tom, who had taken on the form of a werewolf. Clearly, the wolf god system he possessed did not just allow him to take on werewolves. Chapter 742. Although Fei Qi was the regional person in charge of the law enforcement department, he had never been a frontline warrior before. His willpower was not very strong either. Otherwise, he would not have been tempted by Tom and turned into a werewolf. As if Fang Xingjian had just threatened him slightly, Fei Qi told him everything he knew. Although the law enforcing department was in charge of managing all extraordinary powers in the United States, other than the headquarters, no regional person in charge could control any extraordinary powers. The regional troops were still made up of ordinary people who were in charge of investigation and gathering information. After obtaining their information, the law enforcing department's headquarters would then send out troops based on the specific situation. According to Fei Qi, he had only seen 4 experts from the law enforcing department, and each of them had battle prowess that was above that of a second-generation werewolf. However, one second-generation werewolf would be born every month after all. 4 to 5 second-generation werewolves would be sufficient to deal with an expert from the headquarters. Fei Qi judged that the werewolves would be able to control the entire United States government within 5 to 10 years. So, weak. Fang Xingjian's eyes narrowed slightly as he thought of the expert he had encountered on the sun's surface. That expert's strength was not below that of a Tier 3 divine level expert. Therefore, Fang Xingjian looked at Fei Qi and asked, "Then are there any extraordinary organizations in the world that are stronger than the law enforcing department? Who is the strongest extraordinary human in this world?" Fei Qi said, "There are. The strongest extraordinary human organizations in the world are the Crimson Alliance in the East and the Radiant Congress in the West. Their leader is considered to be the strongest person in this world." "How strong are they?" Fang Xingjian asked. I don't know," Fei Qi explained. "That's all classified information. All the governments are basically hiding the existence of extraordinary powers. For example, the Crimson Alliance and the Radiant Congress will erase the memories of the witnesses after they make a move. No one knows what their abilities are and how strong they are." Fang Xingjian frowned. It was clear that this world was different from Miracle World. One reason was because of the stability of modern society. The other reason was that the abilities of the various extraordinary humans in this world were very singular. They did not wish to expose their abilities and strength so that others could find their flaws. This resulted in many extraordinary humans hiding in the darkness. For example, Catherine and Fei Qi, the information they knew was very limited. Despite this, Fang Xingjian still had some estimation of this world's strength. His previous evaluation was probably a little too high. This world might not be as strong as he had imagined. However, with the Douglas family standing in front of him, he was happy to hide behind the scenes. He studied the systems of extraordinary humans while slowly testing out the powers of this world. Therefore, over the next few days, Feng Xingjian stayed in Catherine's villa and continued to teach sword arts to everyone. Later on, even Elena, who possessed the level-up system, came over to learn. Alan and Diana wanted to meet him, but Feng Xingjian rejected them. He only requested that they continue to expand their influence and gather information on extraordinary humans. Although Feng Xingjian did not make a move, Fei Qi, Xingjiani White Slayer, and Qi'erin, with a powerful battle power at Qi, the Fei Qi and Fei Huin, and expanded. With the various wealth and connections they had obtained from the underworld, the Douglas family's business got bigger and bigger. Alan's influence grew rapidly on the West Seacoast. As White Lion won many battles, his name gradually spread throughout the West Seacoast, and he was known as the White Lion the Conqueror. In Antarctica, a black steelfoot stomped down fiercely on the snow-covered ground. The Dark Knight looked up at the intense snowstorm and said, "We're almost there." The terrifying snowstorm almost turned the entire world into a vast expanse of white. Other than strong gales, there was also the snowstorm. One could not even see the situation 10 meters away clearly. Behind him, the Bloody Queen was still wearing the most basic t-shirt and short skirt. However, she kept on shivering. Hearing the Dark Knight's words, she could not help but curse. Be **starred. Why do we have to get off the plane and walk over? My blood vessels are about to be frozen. Cyrus, who was sitting on the Bloody Queen's calf, was hugging it. He smiled and leaned his face against Elizabeth's thigh, looking very satisfied. The Dark Knight's voice was still abnormally cold. The defense in front is too tight. If the fighter aircrafts were to fly over directly, they would be shot down. Just as the two of them were conversing, spots of red light turned cold. Elizabeth was about to make a move when she was stopped by the Dark Knight. "We're here. Don't make a move." At the next moment, densely packed red spots approached them. They were clearly the eyes of many skeletons. Amidst the sounds of bones colliding, the skeletons surrounded the three of them. Their empty eye sockets emitted a gloomy red light, giving off an ominous feeling. Even Elizabeth felt her scalp turn numb when she was surrounded by so many skeletons. The Dark Knight's voice rang out in her mind once again, "Don't make a move. Wait here." Therefore, after waiting for half an hour, just as Elizabeth thought that she was going to be frozen into an ice cube, the skeletons moved to the left and right, opening up a path. A man, who was so skinny that his entire body emitted a gloomy blue cold light, floated over slowly. His eyes were flashing with blue flames, and he was wearing a black robe. When he saw the three of them, the flames in his eyes seemed to flicker a little, and a cold voice entered their minds through spiritual energy. "Dark Knight, it's been a long time. State your purpose for coming here." The Dark Knight said calmly, "I want to meet Suleiman." A strange laughter rang out from the man's mouth. "Only the dead can meet the King of Death." The skeletons in the surroundings trembled, and all of them took out cold weapons such as sabers, spears, and staffs. It was as if they would make a move at any moment. However, at the next moment, a voice rang out from void space, "Let them in." All the skeletons immediately retreated like subjects who had heard the Emperor's orders. The man took a long look at the Dark Knight and said, "Come with me." Elizabeth followed behind the Dark Knight, gulped, and grumbled in her mind. "Who on earth are you here to meet? And what the hell is this skinny guy?" The Dark Knight said calmly, "He's a lich. 14 years ago, he obtained the lich system and turned himself into a lich. He then led the undead calamity and engulfed almost half of Africa." 14 years ago, you're saying? That's right. The war between the two African countries 14 years ago was started because of him. Over 1 million people died in a short 2 months. We paid a huge price to wipe out thousands upon thousands of skeletons, zombies, and all sorts of creatures of darkness. We also spent up to 2 years to deal with the aftermath. Then why didn't you lock him up? The Dark Knight explained, "I'm not good at dealing with magical existences. Therefore, I sent him here and handed him over to someone who specializes in magic to look after him. Elizabeth asked curiously, one of the world's top-notch extraordinary humans, the owner of the Netherworld system, and also the strongest magician in history, Abyss Lord Suleiman. Chapter 743. As they advanced, the group soon entered an underground passageway. They could see countless skeletons carrying out all sorts of excavation, moving, and construction work along the way. A huge underground city gradually appeared before them. This city was filled with all sorts of undead soldiers, such as skeletons and zombies. They carried out all sorts of construction work without rest, continuously expanding the scope of the entire underground city. About half an hour later, the group entered the underground city's experimental area. One by one, the staff members walked back and forth, their faces pale. Elizabeth asked curiously, "They're all living people? Living people can live in this place?" The Lich leading the way grinned. "Are you sure they're living people?" At the next moment, a staff member passed through the wall. Elizabeth's countenance changed, and she scanned the surroundings. She immediately discovered that there were no shadows of the so-called staff members. Even the feet of some of them were covered in fog, and she could not see them clearly. The Lich grinned strangely and said, "They're all ghosts that Master has resurrected. They're scientific elites from a human world." Elizabeth gulped. At the next moment, she suddenly saw a familiar face with messy hair. "Hey," she said hesitantly, "could that be Einstein?" The Lich said, "He's one of the earliest batch of scientists that Master has resurrected." Along the way, they encountered many more familiar faces. Elizabeth's countenance became strange, and she wondered if she had come to the Netherworld. Finally, after passing through another metal door, she saw a young man wearing a white robe doing an experiment on the experiment table. As the group arrived, he said calmly, "Give me 10 minutes. I'll be done in a moment." On the experiment table, a male death row inmate's body would occasionally tremble. Streams of blue electric currents revolved around his body, and as the young man chanted incantations, streams of black gases would occasionally gush into the death row inmate's body. At the next moment, the death row inmate opened his eyes abruptly and looked toward the white-robed young man. "Suleiman, I curse you." As the death row inmate opened his mouth, countless locusts extended out from his mouth and charged toward the white-robed young man. Just as everyone was planning to take action, the white-robed young man snapped his fingers, and blue flames that filled the sky ignited, turning all the locusts that were charging toward him into ashes. Check his physiological index. What about his brain waves? Does his consciousness still exist? What about the alpha particle concentration? As the white-robed young man spoke, many ghosts flew past him. About 5 minutes later, the ghosts dispersed. The white-robed young man let out a sigh, turned his head, looked at the Dark Knight, and asked, "What's the matter?" The Dark Knight did not seek help directly because he knew that it would be useless to seek Suleiman's help directly. The Dark Knight said, "You're trying to transplant the system?" Suleiman nodded. "The existence of the system is dependent on the human will. According to the fluctuations and changes of the human will, it will extract the information and energy from the alpha particles. Information and energy were the foundation of the entire universe. As long as one had enough information and energy, one would be able to obtain all kinds of power. Our current research on alpha particles is nothing at all." The Dark Knight said, "I can announce to you all of my research on alpha particles." Suleiman was slightly stunned. After a moment of silence, he smiled and said, "Sorry, let's cut to the chase. I can't help you with this matter." "You already know?" Hearing that, the Dark Knight was taken aback. However, thinking of Suleiman's magic, he soon stopped dwelling on this and asked why. The other party didn't show any malicious intent to destroy Earth, Suleiman said calmly. "As for whether tens of thousands or tens of thousands of people will die, it doesn't matter to me." The Dark Knight frowned. "Do you know how dangerous he is? Perhaps he doesn't have any malicious intent right now, but an existence like this is already a great threat. We must keep him under surveillance." Suleiman said calmly. Threat? Our existence itself is a threat. For example, has anyone been monitoring your black technology system? Why don't you announce it and hand it over to the government? The Dark Knight said coldly. The current humans still don't have enough self-restraint to grasp these technologies. Once we hand it over to them, as long as one of them is unable to control their desires, it might cause great harm to the entire human world. Then what about you? Suleiman said calmly. Are you sure that you'll be able to control that desire at all times? The Dark Knight was stunned for a moment, but Suleiman continued. What if you lose control? Peter, you're not a god. You're just a human. It's impossible for you to control the entire world. Go back and have a good sleep. Enjoy the pleasures of the living. The Dark Knight said in a deep voice, There are 20 million femtometer robots in my brain, and the artificial intelligence Nicola is constantly monitoring my thoughts. If I were to overstep in any way and attempt to use the black technology system to gain benefits for myself, he'll detonate my brain. I've never trusted any human, and that naturally includes myself. Hearing the Dark Knight's words, everyone present was astonished. They were both astonished by the Dark Knight's viciousness and slightly astonished by his moral character. Suleiman could not help but fall silent, let out a sigh, and said, Why? No one can remain unchanged forever. I can only do my best to maintain humanity's stability. The Dark Knight stared at Suleiman and said, Help me out. I need your magic. Letting out a sigh, Suleiman said, You have a spaceship, right? What do you mean? The Dark Knight asked puzzledly. The other party has probably already arrived on Earth. Caesar has been thrown into the geosynchronous orbit. Haven't you noticed it all this while? Los Angeles, United States. In the manor, Catherine and the other 6 people were still floating in midair. Ever since they had entered the dream previously, they had only been in the dream. Feng Xinjiang had been pouring in information at almost every moment, and their abilities were going through a metamorphosis with every passing minute and second. Through the research on the extraordinary powers of these few different systems, Feng Xinjiang also gained a new understanding of his own system. The powers of knights come from ether particles. It's the same for these extraordinary humans. They use their wills to draw out the information and energy from ether particles, forming all sorts of extraordinary abilities. And systems are the tools they use to influence ether particles. It's the same for my knight system. It's just that the way it operates is more secretive and more perfect. It has even created things like physical particles, becoming a part of the system's carrier. While thinking, Feng Xinjiang controlled Jack's body and kept on channeling energy from ether particles into him. Simultaneously, the many song scores in Jack's mind were projected out, turning into light screens that were projected in the air. Each of the songs had yet to appear in the world, but they were good songs that could be sung all over the world. Feng Xinjiang's attention was naturally not on the songs themselves. Instead, it showed that he could bypass Jack's will and directly control part of his system. If I have more samples to experiment with, I might be able to reverse engineer the system and let my knight system grasp the powers of these systems. Chapter 744. As Feng Xinjiang pondered, he beckoned with his palm, and the unconscious Elena flew over. A tremendous amount of milky white light kept on gushing into her body, increasing her abilities. The leveling up system that Elena possessed allowed her to gain experience after killing her opponents. With enough experience, she would be able to level up. However, her level system was clearly different from the knight system. She did not have any extraordinary powers and could only gain 5 attribute points after leveling up, which could be freely added to her strength, agility, reaction, endurance, and flexibility. The calculation method for these 5 attributes was almost the same as the knight system. Clearly, the knight system in the future might have absorbed a portion of the advantages of this leveling up system. Through Feng Xinjiang's research during this period of time, he was now able to channel energy and information from ether particles directly into her body, turning them into experience to help her level up. Right now, Elena had leveled up from level 40 to level 200, possessing a total of 800 attribute points. Feng Xingjian had helped her distribute these attributes evenly, allowing all of Elena's 5 attributes to be at least 200 points. After all, if all of them were to be piled up on a single attribute, it might result in a lack of physical strength, clumsy movements, and inability to react. It would be a waste of attribute points. With such an average distribution of attribute points, it would be able to unleash the potential of each attribute point without any wastage. Therefore, although Elena had only learned a few sets of basic sword techniques, her 5 attributes had all reached at least 200 points. She already possessed the terrifying ability to allow her physical body to surpass the speed of sound and her punches and kicks to shatter mountains and rivers. Thereafter, in order to be able to better unleash her physical attributes, Feng Xingjian imparted her with the supreme Mist-Wind sword. Just then, Feng Xingjian frowned slightly and looked in the direction of the manor's gate. At the next moment, his body flashed slightly, and he reassembled himself at the manor's gate. He saw that White Lion's head and chest had been bandaged up. When White Lion saw Feng Xingjian, he dropped to his knees and said with a bitter smile, "Teacher, your student is useless. When I was chasing after Tom, who created werewolves, not only did I fail to kill him, but I was also injured by him." Oh, Feng Xingjian had not expected that with White Lion's current battle prowess, he would still be seriously injured by the other party. He asked, "Is he very powerful?" White Lion said, feeling ashamed, "Right now, not only can Tom create werewolves, but he can also create a monster called the Ghost Wolf. It can turn into an incorporeal form to dodge attacks, or take on a physical form to attack others. It can also turn into a formless state at any time to retreat or sneak in. It's very difficult to deal with. My injury was caused by a sneak attack. Our frontline troops have already lost over 100 people, but we're still unable to lock onto his location." After that, he sent the Ghost Wolf to attack Alan. Fortunately, he only killed 1 substitute and failed. Ever since Alan Douglas had been kidnapped by the werewolves, he had been more cautious this time around. He had hired a few substitutes to act as his replacements. Usually, he would hide in the underground fortifications and never come out. White Lion then requested for help. "Teacher, please make a trip down personally and capture that Tom." Hearing that, Feng Xingjian nodded but did not take it to heart. To White Lion and Alan, these matters were of great importance. However, to Feng Xingjian, it was just a fight between children. Their level was too low, and he was not interested in spending time to deal with Tom. Therefore, with a casual wave of his hand, Jack and Elena flew out. At the next moment, they opened their eyes and stood on the ground. Feng Xingjian had researched more or less the functions of these two people's systems, and he had dug out all the potential he could. Jack had been given a set of shadowless sound sword, which could make use of his system's ability to control sound waves to perform this set of killing sword technique. Its prowess was unparalleled, and its battle prowess far surpassed that of White Lion's. Elena had been brought up to level 200 by Feng Xingjian, and she was now in existence akin to a little Superman. If White Lion were to face her, he would probably be beaten to death within a few punches and kicks. Moreover, Feng Xingjian had also casually taught her a set of supreme Mist-Wind sword, which could bring out her powerful physical attributes. Feng Xingjian said calmly, "I've imparted the two of them with top-notch sword techniques. Now that they've come out of seclusion after learning them, they'll be able to help you expand your influence and capture Tom." White Lion had always held great admiration for the prowess of Feng Xingjian's sword arts. The fact that his own abilities had increased by over 10 times was the best proof. However, he felt that Feng Xingjian had still underestimated Tom. Even if Jack and Elena had battle prowess that was about the same as his, it would still be too much for them to deal with Tom's army of ghost wolves. Therefore, he said hesitantly, "Teacher, that Tom has several hundred ghost wolves under him, and they're not to be underestimated. Moreover, he has an unknown system, and this number is still increasing. If we don't gather our forces and get rid of them in advance, they'll definitely become a great threat in the future." White Lion thought that Feng Xingjian was still unaware of Tom's threat. so he reiterated his point. However, Fang Xingjian shook his head and said calmly to Jack and Elena, "The two of them are enough to deal with. Also, quickly unify the influences across the entire West Coast, and then invite all the extraordinary humans in the vicinity over for a chat. If you can't invite them over, then kidnap them over. Within 10 days, I want all the extraordinary humans in the West Coast to appear before me." An hour later, White Lion brought Jack and Elena back to the Silver Shield's new headquarters. It was a skyscraper with a height of 30 floors. He was still very worried about how Fang Xingjian had underestimated Tom. White Lion sighed and said, "Sigh, teacher still underestimates Tom too much. Regardless of whether it's his system's potential, his forbearance, his schemes, or his abilities, all of them are extremely amazing. He's someone I've never seen before. If we can't get rid of him at one go, he'll definitely become a great threat in the future." However, Elena smiled and clenched her fist. Sensing the overwhelming power in her body, she was not afraid at all. Just then, the phone rang. White Lion picked it up, and his countenance changed as he said, "Tom's traces have been discovered at the Colorado Canyon in Arizona, United States. As one of the most famous and magnificent sceneries in the United States, this canyon had a length of over 400 kilometers. The deepest part of it was over 1,800 meters, and the widest part of the canyon's top could reach up to 28 kilometers. Looking at the canyon from within, one could not help but be amazed by the majesty of the world and the magnificence of nature. Right now, Tom was wearing a suit and sitting leisurely on a steep cliff. A ghost wolf lay meekly behind him like it was a sofa, and Tom was stroking the ghost wolf's furry head with one hand. Gunshots rang out in the canyon under Tom's feet. Occasionally, there would be enraged bellows and shouts from humans, as well as the roars of beasts. A team of over 10 gunmen kept on retreating under the attacks of 4 monsters. They seemed to be unable to put up any resistance at all. Chapter 745. The 4 monsters were clearly Cerberus. Each of them had a height of 5 meters and a length of over 15 meters. Their thick and powerful limbs were burning with blazing flames, and their 3 heads would occasionally roar toward the sky, revealing sharp teeth that were like long swords. Their skin was as rough as volcanic lava. Occasionally, lava would seep out from the surface of their bodies and drip onto the ground, bringing forth streams of flames. The gunners' bullets did not have any effect on their bodies. It was as if they were just scratching an itch. In addition to the spiritual chi of terror that the Cerberus continued to emit, many of the gunners fled in all directions within a short period of time. However, their escape was as slow as snails in front of the Cerberus. The 4 monsters were like tanks charging forward at a speed of 100 kilometers per hour. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the gunmen were killed. Their casual swipes of their claws and careless collisions would tear apart human bodies. Then they would open their mouths and swallow the fresh flesh into the air. Looking at the 4 Cerberus that were chasing after the gunners in the valley, Tom could not help but break into a satisfied smile. His system had been upgraded once again, and he now had the ability to summon the Cerberus. These Cerberus were impenetrable and indestructible. Even if they were hit by a tank, they would be unscathed. Even if they were hit head-on by a Tomahawk cruise missile, they would only suffer from serious injuries. They could also make use of flames to undergo rapid regeneration. Moreover, the hell's flames that constantly burned on their bodies, which were at a temperature of over 1,000 degrees Celsius, could also scorch a human's will. Their strength and speed were no small matter, and the second-generation werewolf from before were like children's toys in their hands. They also constantly maintained the spiritual chi of terror 100 meters around them. It was enough to make anyone who did not have a strong will tremble in fear and give up on resisting. With these 4 Cerberus, the number of ordinary warriors no longer meant anything. They could even easily clash head-on against a tank troop. They could only be defeated if they encountered fighter aircrafts, battleships, or long-distance missile attacks. After being chased by those Douglas family's lackeys for so long, it's time for me to retaliate. Tom smirked coldly. If it wasn't because you guys sent so many people for me to kill, allowing me to gather so much vengeance from the dead, I wouldn't have been able to level up so quickly and be able to summon the Cerberus. It turned out that Tom had been intentionally escaping all this while, so that the Douglas family would keep on sending people over for him to kill. He wanted to collect the resentment of the dead and level up his wolf god system. Therefore, for the next few hours, Tom stayed in the valley, using himself as bait to attract the Douglas clan's gunmen to attack him. In just 2 hours, a total of 4 waves of more than 50 gunmen had entered the valley, but all of them had become food for the Cerberus. The terrifying roars had become the nightmares of countless people. In the next half an hour, although there were many people wandering around the periphery and observing, no one dared to approach. Tom sneered and thought to himself, "You don't dare to come? Fine, if you don't dare to come, then it's my turn to kill my way over." At the thought of how Tom had been hiding all over the place during this period of time, fighting incessantly day and night, although he had done it intentionally, he had still been holding back his anger. This made Tom furious, and he made up his mind to make the Douglas family bleed and replace them. It just so happens that their influence has been expanding during this period of time, integrating countless underworld organizations. This has saved me a lot of effort. Just then, Tom's gaze narrowed, and a hint of blue flashed in his eyes. He was sharing the vision of a ghost wolf 1 kilometer away. It was by relying on the ghost wolf's vision sharing that he was able to surround, ambush, and retreat time and time again. He was almost undefeatable. An off-road vehicle drove into the valley and slowly came to a stop. 2 men and a lady got off the vehicle, and one of them was White Lion, who had attacked him previously. It's this guy again. It seems that the other man and lady are also extraordinary humans. Tom smiled. You've come at the right time. Do you think that 3 extraordinary humans will be able to deal with me? I can give you guys a little surprise. Seeing the 3 of them slowly walking toward the Cerberus, Tom smiled and directed the Ghost Wolf army to surround the 3 of them. When the battle broke out, he could already predict that the 3 of them would be defeated by the Cerberus. He could then use the Ghost Wolves to launch a pincer attack and trap the 3 of them. White Lion walked in the valley, looking at the charred and torn corpses along the way. His brows furrowed even more tightly as he reminded them, "You guys be careful later on. Those Ghost Wolves come and go without a trace, and they have great teamwork. You mustn't be careless." Moreover, I heard from my subordinates that Tom seems to have an additional monster under him. It's similar to the legendary Cerberus. Ordinary gunshots have no effect on it, and its strength and speed far surpass that of the Ghost Wolves. You must be careful. White Lion's countenance was extremely grim. It was as he had thought. Tom's potential was too great. Within a short period of time, his subordinates' battle prowess had increased once again. Looking at how Jack and Elena did not seem to care, White Lion sighed inwardly. This time around, Teacher might really be wrong. For some reason, he had a faint, ominous feeling in his mind. The 3 of them had physical attributes that far surpassed those of ordinary people. Even if they were just casually walking around, they would be able to cross a distance of several hundred meters within over 10 seconds. As the scorching sensation continued to rise in the air, the smell of sulfur and lava entered their noses. Roar! When White Lion saw the forced Cerberus appear before him, his pupils contracted abruptly. Just by looking at their sizes and appearances, he could tell that these 4 monsters were not easy to deal with. Furthermore, the spiritual light of fear that was gushing toward them kept on stimulating the terror in his heart. Just then, endless wolf howls rang out from all directions. Many huge blue and transparent wolves appeared in the air from all directions, eyeing the 3 of them fiercely. They had clearly surrounded White Lion and the other 2 completely. There were over 400 ghost wolves. This number far surpassed White Lion's and the others' estimations. Clearly, Tom had intentionally hidden his strength during the chase earlier. White Lion's heart started to sink, and his tone was filled with an extremely tragic tone. Prepare to retreat. I'll bring up the rear. You guys charge out with all your might and immediately report this to Teacher. Tom's strength has increased too rapidly. get him to take action personally. If we let this person continue to live. Saying this, his eyes were filled with regret. He did not dare to imagine how far Tom's system could develop if it were to continue to grow. Chapter 746. Before White Lion could finish his words, Elena had already dashed out abruptly. An explosive bang rang out under her feet, and a huge pit was formed under her feet, leaving behind a series of afterimages. Wherever she passed by, a series of air currents were created, and she was like a missile, smashing into the hellhound's head. It was only at this moment that a loud rumble rang out in White Lion's ears. Under his dumbfounded gaze, the hellhound's middle head had been smashed into its chest by Elena. Then, amidst a world-shaking and agonizing cry, Elena raised her leg up high and then pressed down. With a tomahawk-style kick, she stomped down and crushed the hellhound's spine with a boom. In the blink of an eye, the hellhound fell to the ground like a pool of mud. In the distance, Tom stood up abruptly, and goosebumps broke out all over his body. Who was this woman? Thinking of how a hellhound had died, just like that, Tom felt both infuriated and terrified. He immediately ordered, "Kill them all." In that instant, the remaining 3 hellhounds bellowed fiercely, and flames burst out from their bodies. They charged out toward Elena like 3 huge fireballs. Wherever they passed by, the ground would be burned into charcoal, and the temperature in the entire valley's vicinity started to rise rapidly. Faced with this world-shaking prowess, White Lion turned pale with fright. "Run quickly!" He sent out over 10 streams of platinum sword cheese, slashing them onto the 3-headed hellhound's body. However, other than infuriating it and causing a large amount of blood to spurt out, they were unable to stop the 3-headed hellhound's prowess at all. At the sight of this scene, Tom revealed a cold and contemptuous smile as he thought, "All of you can die." Just as White Lion was about to turn and flee, Elena made her move once again. Faced with the 3 huge fireballs pouncing toward her, she did not choose to take them head-on. After all, although her physical attributes were extraordinary, she would still be burned. Therefore, she did not choose to come into direct contact with the high temperature. Instead, she tapped out with a finger, and violent power gushed forth. This finger tap seemed to explode the air, instantly unleashing over 1,000 streams of sword cheese that shot out toward the 3-headed hellhound. It was the supreme Mistwind sword that Feng Xingjian had imparted to Elena. The prowess of each of the Mistwind swords' sword cheese might not be comparable to White Lion's platinum sword cheese. However, after Elena tapped out with her finger, she tapped out again. After a few consecutive taps, an overwhelming amount of sword cheese gushed out, completely encompassing the 3-headed hellhound like a tempest. There was so much sword cheese that it was as if they had gathered into a sea of swords. Sounds rang out. At this moment, it was as if there were several hundred Elenas holding small knives, surrounding the 3-headed hellhound and slashing at it incessantly. Amidst the agonizing cries, the 3-headed hellhound fell down one after another, and the flames on its body gradually extinguished. Lava kept on bursting out from their bodies like fresh blood. The sword chi did not stop, and the remaining force spread out in all directions. Amidst terrifying slicing sounds, the ground was cut 3 feet deep, and smoke and dust filled the air. White Lion looked at this scene in great astonishment. To him, the sword technique performed by Elena was like a miracle. The densely packed sword cheese were a ghastly sight. Their prowess was so great that they did not lose out to a Tomahawk cruise missile. They might even be stronger than it. Tom, who was far away, watched as the 4 hellhounds died. Seeing that, he felt as though his heart would bleed. However, what terrified him even more was Elena, who had attacked with her sword. Seeing how the little girl had easily wiped out 3 of his trump cards, he felt goosebumps all over his body. He had the urge to escape immediately. It was at this moment that the attacks of the 400 ghost wolves arrived. This time around, Jack was the one who made the move. The nature of sound was vibrations, and vibrations could be an attack with the strongest destructive prowess toward physical structures in this world. When the 400 ghost wolves appeared simultaneously and pounced toward the three of them, Jack opened his mouth slightly, and invisible sword waves were released from his mouth. It was a special sword wave that human ears would not be able to hear. However, wherever it passed by, it was as if the world was being swept by a layer of invisible power. The ground turned into dust layer by layer, and the plants exploded into powder with a bang. Many ghost wolves also exploded with bang, 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 bang sounds, turning into fragments amidst the intense vibrations. Under the high-frequency vibrations, there are not many physical substances that could fend off such attacks. They disintegrated rapidly and dissipated into the air. It was the same for the ghost wolves. When they took on an incorporeal form, they could avoid coming into contact with any physical substances. However, when they took on a physical form, they could come into contact with others. This meant that they would be attacked. After killing over 400 ghost wolves with a single attack, Tom, who was in the distance, instantly lost the shared vision. He stood up, drenched in cold sweat, and his face was filled with horror. His feet moved rapidly, and he seemed to have turned into a series of afterimages as he fled into the distance. Terrifying. This man and woman are too terrifying. How can there be such terrifying experts? My system needs to be upgraded at least 3 more times. No, 5 more times before I could be able to go up against them. At the thought of this, his movements became increasingly faster. In the blink of an eye, he was already running on all 4 limbs, and he gradually turned into a ghost wolf. Just as he was running, a black line cut across the sky. Elena had broken through the sound barrier and was dashing toward him at an extreme speed. Almost at the instant Tom turned his head, a ferocious fist had already smashed into Tom's waist. With a sound, Tom's waist was smashed into 2, and fresh blood splattered out instantly. Tom's lower body remained where it was, while his upper body was sent flying. Elena tore through the atmosphere once again and struck out another punch toward Tom's chest. However, just as Elena's fist was about to strike Tom's body with majestic air currents, Tom had already turned incorporeal and disappeared. Elena frowned and continued to strike out with her fist. She then punched out wildly in all directions, lashing out at the air. It was as if many bombs had been lit up, and amidst the series of air explosions, dust flew up into the air. Tom, who had turned incorporeal, looked at this scene in astonishment and fury. Meanwhile, his lower body was slowly regenerating. It turned out that each time his system leveled up, other than being able to command a new type of monster, he would also gain the special characteristics of a new monster. This meant that he now possessed the regenerative abilities of a werewolf, the ability to change between incorporeal and incorporeal from a ghost wolf, as well as the flames of a hellhound, fearsome spiritual cheese, and physique. This woman is a lunatic. Tom gulped and left at a rapid speed. He made up his mind that unless he was completely confident, he would definitely not come and provoke the people from the Douglas family. Is this woman the trump card of the Douglas family? Thankfully, they can't do anything to the ghost wolf's ability. Wait for me to come back next time. Tom left at a rapid speed, no longer looking behind him. His eyes were filled with a burning will to fight. Elena let out a furious bellow. She had not expected that Tom would also possess the ability to change between the ghost wolf's incorporeal and incorporeal state. Therefore, the Douglas family continued to send out various forces to search for Tom's traces. However, it was as if he had completely disappeared, never appearing again. On the other side, Jack and Elena charged over. Under Fong Xinjian's orders, they made a shocking entrance with their astonishing battle prowess. With their speed, they would be able to cross a city every few minutes. The 2 of them took action simultaneously, one from the south and one from the north. With the support of the Douglas family's intelligence network, they killed their way into the headquarters of those gangs, killed a batch of people, and supported another batch of people. They would then be able to take over an entire gang. All sorts of Chinese societies, Vietnamese societies, Mexican gangs, Colombian gangs, African gangs, and many others were all conquered. There was almost no one who could stop them across the entire United States West Coast. Within a short span of over 10 days, the two of them had swept through several tens of cities and towns like a tempest, expanding the Douglas family's influence across the entire West Coast and ruling over countless underworld influences. Their influence and connections spread throughout California, Oregon, Washington, and other large states, turning them into an unprecedented underworld empire. They received the close attention of the police of various states, the FBI, and other national organizations. However, they were unable to do anything to Elena and Jack. The underworld influences in the United States had always been very powerful. This was especially so for the several hundred gangs with Los Angeles as the center. They had a capital worth several trillions and a total of over several 100,000 people. They were involved in food, catering, medicinal herbs, firearms, drugs, pornography, entertainment, and over 100 other industries. They were existences that could affect the national level. However, there were many factions within the various gangs. Different gangs had different backgrounds and races, causing these gangs to fight and kill each other. They had never been unified before. One could imagine how great of a backlash the two of them would receive from their actions. Over the past half a month or so, there had been countless assassinations, arrests, sneak attacks, and encirclement attempts against the two of them. They had even been challenged, sneak attacked, and assassinated by 12 extraordinary humans. However, all of them had been useless. Instead, they had increased the two of them's prowess. With just the two of them, they were able to suppress countless gangs, causing people's expressions to change at the mention of it. Extraordinary powers started to appear in the eyes of ordinary people. Elena was also known as the female tyrant due to her powerful strength. She was known as the strongest expert on the United States West Coast and was respected and worshipped by countless gangs and several 100,000 members of the West Coast. Each of her words and actions could stir up mountains and rivers, implicating the lives of over 10,000 people. This series of actions had happened too quickly, so quickly that many people had not been able to react to it. By the time they noticed it, the Douglas family had already become an unprecedented colossus. Although it was bloated, difficult to command due to the lack of integration, difficult to restrain all the members, and even because the wealth was too messy and massive, no one was able to calculate the exact figure. It was still a terrifying monster. There was probably no government that would be able to accept such an uncontrollable and massive influence in their territory. Moreover, they also had a tremendous amount of firearms and extraordinary powers. Therefore, the United States Supernatural Governing Organization, the Law Enforcing Department, finally placed their attention on this underworld empire that had suddenly risen up. Chapter 747. At the Beverly Hills Hotel in Los Angeles, an extremely lively cocktail party was being held in the hotel. This time around, the organizer of the cocktail party was the Douglas family. It could be said to be an astonishing gathering of countless gangs and wealthy people across the entire United States West Coast. The focus of this banquet was naturally Elena, the female tyrant with world-shaking martial prowess who was invincible and unrivaled, who had shaken the entire West Coast. Elena was dressed in a gown and sat casually in a corner, holding a cocktail in her hand. She constantly attracted the attention of everyone present, and occasionally, people would cast their gazes toward her. However, due to Elena's killing reputation, no one dared to get close to her. Moreover, she had just thrown out 3 men who had dared to hit on her out of the cocktail party. Just then, a commotion rang out at the entrance of the hotel. Seeing that the commotion was getting louder and louder without any signs of dying down, and there were even gasps mixed in, Elena frowned. She called one of her subordinates over and asked, "What's the matter?" It seems that 2 Chinese people got into a conflict. One of them asked the other to scram, but the other party beat up all of his bodyguards. Oh, Elena's brows twitched. Are you sure that they're not intentionally causing trouble? That shouldn't be the case. They seem to know each other. There might be some grudges between them previously. As the subordinate spoke, he was stunned for a moment. He looked at a Chinese man who was walking over and said, It's him. Under everyone's gazes, an elegant Chinese young man with a jade-like face walked up to Elena and sat down next to her. To think that this kid dares to offend Elena. There was an insensible male celebrity who went over earlier, but he was thrown out by Elena in less than 3 seconds. I think this kid will be done soon. However, to everyone's surprise, Elena did not throw out the man who had gotten close to her casually. Instead, she looked at the Chinese young man curiously and said, "An extraordinary human?" Her instincts told her that the other party was not to be underestimated. "Oh, you can tell?" The Chinese young man smiled and said, "I'm Tang Song. You must be Elena, right? Are you interested in getting to know each other?" One of her subordinates whispered into Elena's ear, "This is the representative of the Tang clan from Hong Kong. They also have a branch in Los Angeles." Elena looked at Tang Song and said, "You're very confident." Tang Song shrugged and did not say anything. However, his gaze toward Elena was filled with admiration. Of course, he was confident. With the heavenly immortal system, as long as he continued to satisfy the admiration required by the system, he would be able to obtain the memories and power of a heavenly immortal who had cultivated for 50 billion years. This allowed him to become a core character in the Crimson Alliance within a short year. Not only did he have a huge influence in Hong Kong, but he had also taught a lesson to a member of an enemy clan at the entrance. Shrugging his shoulders, Tang Song's smile was filled with absolute confidence. "It's better for women to be gentle. Elena, don't you think that you'll look prettier when you're gentler?" "Elena, why do you have such a Angelus, Elena, Angelus?" Hearing his words, the countless fighters from the Douglas family revealed ferocious gazes. Fang Xingjian was simply taking liberties with their leader on the spot. Elena raised her brows and was about to flare up. However, at the next moment, she calmed down and said calmly, "I'll teach you a lesson next time." After saying that, she left without looking back. Is this still the female tyrant? Could it be that Elena has taken a liking to this gigolo? Seeing Elena leave just like that, countless people were extremely astonished. In their eyes, Tang Song suddenly became unfathomable. However, Tang Song picked up the cocktail that Elena had been drinking earlier, tasted it, and revealed a mysterious smile as he watched Elena's departing back. This woman is really vicious. However, subduing her is equivalent to taking over the entire West Coast's underworld influence without spending a single soldier. It's a great deal. At the next moment, a thunderous roar rang out in the sky. Tang Song looked at the sky curiously and said, "Thunder." Elena leaped lightly into the sky the moment she stepped out of the door. Then, accompanied by a series of thunderous roars, she crossed the city and arrived above the sea a few minutes later. "Come out." As she let out a bellow, 3 men wearing special battle suits appeared behind her. Seeing Elena standing on the sea with her hands behind her back, one of the men said, "You came here intentionally? You want to deal with the 3 of us alone?" Elena said coldly, "There are too many of you, and I can't fight freely. I'm afraid I might accidentally kill you." The man laughed coldly. "Do you know who we are? The law enforcing department has already taken notice of you, Elena. You abused your extraordinary abilities and interfered with the mortal world, killing countless people. You have 2 choices now." Before he could finish his words, his head exploded. It was only then that Elena appeared behind him, her fist still in the posture of having punched out. She shook her head and said, "You only have 2 choices as well. Die or surrender." The remaining 2 men bellowed furiously and dashed out toward Elena. 1 hour later, in Beverly Hills, on the lawn of Catherine's Manor, over 20 extraordinary humans were floating in midair, sleeping. They were in a dream, and Fang Xingjian kept on channeling sword intent into them to cultivate various sword techniques. Fang Xingjian's attention was fully focused on these extraordinary humans. He was observing the reactions of the systems in their bodies at almost every moment. Ever since the Douglas family had unified the entire West Coast underworld, under Elena's lead, she had brought over 10 extraordinary humans who were either in hiding, resisting, or seeking refuge with them over to Feng Xingjian to deal with. This allowed Feng Xingjian to have a deeper understanding of the systems, and it also allowed the process of Catherine's physical body turning into physical particles to be finally completed today. However, although Catherine's entire body structure had been turned into physical particles, it still did not allow Feng Xingjian to sense the existence of Miracle World in the slightest, allowing him to break through this tier of the nine-tiered heavens. Behind Feng Xingjian, Elena knelt down on one knee. Her eyelids were lowered, and she only glanced at Feng Xingjian's back from the corner of her eyes. As she looked at this man's back, a hint of conflict flashed in her eyes. The current me. Am I a match for her? Right now, after the series of massacres in the West Coast Unification Battle, Elena had already reached level 212. Both her agility and strength had exceeded 250 points, and her strength far surpassed the imagination of ordinary people. She could be said to be able to stomp on the air, fly in the air, break mountains, and split seas with a single punch, kill people with a single breath, and have a body that was so strong that it could ignore tanks' main cannons. All of these had become her standard. The repeated victories and the counterattacks of her opponents, who were weak, made Elena increasingly confident in her own strength. This was especially so after she had easily killed 3 experts from the law enforcing department. This made her even more curious. She could not help but want to know, can teacher defeat me? Chapter 748. The answer to this question was like an ant nesting in her heart, making her feel extremely upset. She yearned for the answer to this question very much. However, Feng Xingjian's prowess was deeply engraved in her heart, causing her to keep on suppressing her curiosity and impulses. When Feng Xingjian turned around, Elena still lowered her head and suppressed the impulses in her heart. She said, "I'm sorry, teacher. Tom's ghost wolf technique is too powerful in terms of stealth, and we weren't able to find him. However, out of the 3 people from the law enforcing department, 1 is dead and the other 2 are injured. I've obtained some information from them." Behind Elena, the 3 people from the law enforcing department were lying flat on the grass. One of them was a headless corpse, while the other 2 had already fainted. It doesn't matter anymore. Just send someone to continue the chase. Right now, Feng Xingjian already had a sufficient number of extraordinary humans on hand, so he did not care about Tom at all. However, the matter regarding the law enforcing department caught his attention. He asked, have you found out any information about the experts in this world?" "Yes," Elena said. "The Crimson Alliance and the Radiant Congress are the strongest extraordinary influences in this world." The information he had obtained from the 2 extraordinary humans from the law enforcing department was not very detailed, but it was sufficient for Feng Xingjian to deduce many things. This was especially so for the information regarding the few strongest experts in the Crimson Alliance and the Radiant Congress. The law enforcing department had a very clear understanding of these. Son of God? Superhuman system? Then it seems that the guy I knocked unconscious on the sun is him. Feng Xingjian deduced based on the information. If he's the strongest expert in this world, then I won't have to be so concerned. Moreover, he had gained some result from his research during this period of time. Other than being able to control a portion of the system in the other party's body, he had also gained an understanding of part of the theory behind how the system used physical particles as a carrier. Catherine has completed the process of turning physical particles into physical particles, but I'm still unable to sense Miracle World. This means that my influence is still insufficient? Then, should I turn more people into physical particles? In that case, Feng Xingjian had given a world ether particles the previous time around. This time around, he had spread the physical particles throughout the entire world. However, if he were to really get everyone on Earth to transform into physical particles and naturally grasp the night cultivation method, then he would be able to completely change the history of the entire world. Moreover, during this process, Feng Xingjian would have a myriad of experimental materials. He might even be able to observe the true formation and evolution process of the night system. Then let's try it out first. Feng Xingjian looked at Elena and lifted his finger gently. Then her body floated up abruptly. Although Elena had the leveling up system, it was more of a strengthening effect of ether particles on her physical body. It did not change the physical nature of her body. This kind of person also had a strong physique, which was just right for Feng Xingjian to try out his method. Focus, be serious, and remember my next actions. This is a new sword technique that I'm going to teach you. It's enough to let you be reborn and become stronger. A cold voice rang out in Elena's mind. At the next moment, a numb feeling extended out from her chest. The bioelectric currents in her body condensed, extended, and flowed, causing hints of strange changes to happen in her body. Remember, this reincarnation sword technique is a set of sword technique that can completely change your body's nature and open up the path of the human body's evolution. It's also a set of pure internal martial arts that only focuses on internal movements and no external movements. You must remember this well and not make any mistakes. As Feng Xingjian spoke, the energy in the ether particles turned into streams of violent electric currents and barged into Elena's body. They stimulated every single molecule and atom in her body through a unique method. It was as if each stream of electric currents had turned into a thunderbolt sword, cleansing Elena's body with overwhelming sword force and heavenly prowess. One day later, 100 physical particles were born consecutively from Elena's body. Her battle prowess did not receive a qualitative improvement, but her body's toughness and potential were all different from before. Looking at Elena, who had woken up, Feng Xingjian said, "From now on, go back and practice it every day." Elena nodded and sensed the difference in her body. It was as if her body had become stronger once again. She was still thinking about the reincarnation sword technique's description. 1.08 billion physical particles? As long as I continue to cultivate and turn my body into 1.08 billion physical particles, I'll be able to surpass the limitations of an ordinary person's physical body and possess powers like that of a god. At this moment, with the help of the changes in the 100 physical particles in her body, she could faintly sense that Feng Xingjian seemed to possess a similar power. "Teacher, is this the power that you've grasped?" At this moment, a burning ambition rose from the bottom of her heart. 3 days later, another 3 extraordinary humans woke up from their dreams and grasped the reincarnation sword technique. 2 days later, another 10 extraordinary humans woke up. 1 day later, the first ordinary person succeeded in cultivating the reincarnation sword technique. Feng Xingjian's talent was too terrifying. He had reached the 10th level of the mystical prince and had the world's top sword arts talent. This allowed his research speed to be extremely fast. After clarifying the connection between physical particles, the system, and ether particles, he had created a set of sword technique that could turn ordinary people into physical particles within a mere few days. Of course, although this sword technique had been invented, it still required time to cultivate it. Ordinary people would probably need to spend 20 to 30 years before they could completely turn their bodies into the structure of physical particles. During this process, their physiques would be strengthened by incessantly stimulating the power of ether particles. At most, they would be able to reach the level of an ordinary first transition expert. Feng Xingjian understood that this was a set of sword technique that could change the world. It was also the crux for him to attain a breakthrough to the first tier of the 9-tiered heavens. It was also the method for him to obtain more of the system's profoundness. I must disseminate this set of sword technique. The more people learn this set of sword technique, the harder it will be to change history. I'll also have more examples to observe. If I can see the process of the night system taking shape, it'll be of great help to me. A short moment later, Feng Xingjian woke Catherine up and asked directly, "You have connections to a television station, right?" "Huh." As a top-notch model, an internet celebrity, a young mistress from a wealthy family, and a fashionista, Catherine naturally had connections to a television station. However, she did not understand why Feng Xingjian wanted this. Feng Xingjian said, "Help me get in touch with a television station. I want to disseminate a set of sword technique. The first method that Fang Xingjian could think of that was authoritative enough was naturally the television station. Moreover, if the strongest expert in this world only had the battle prowess of a Tier 3 divine level expert, he would naturally not have too many reservations. Disseminate sword technique? But this... Catherine was stunned. She was even more confused as to why Fang Xingjian was going to die. There are no buts. Fang Xingjian tapped out with a finger and sent the reincarnation sword technique's contents into Catherine's brain. Use all your means to disseminate this set of sword technique on the internet after it's broadcasted on television. I want everyone in the world to cultivate this set of sword technique. Chapter 749. At the entrance of the United States ABC television station. Fang Xingjian and Catherine got off the car slowly and looked at the television station's building. Fang Xingjian scanned it with his martial will, nodded, and said, "There are quite a lot of people, but is the coverage of this television station wide enough? I hope that as many people in the world as possible can watch me teach sword arts. And the level of cooperation. There must be a television station that will continuously broadcast it in the morning, afternoon, night, and late at night." Catherine nodded and said with a hint of pride in her tone, "Don't worry, Xingjian. This is the ABC television station. There won't be any problems. As for the level of cooperation, Elena and my father have already spoken to Robert. There definitely won't be any problems. As one of the world's largest television stations, the United States ABC Broadcasting Company was undoubtedly one of the top 500 companies in the world. It had over 200 affiliated television stations in the United States, and its audience was almost spread across the entire Americas. It was definitely a giant. Just as Fang Xingjian and Catherine were talking, another couple walked over. The man was handsome, had brilliant golden hair, and a pair of blue eyes. He was wearing the most fashionable suit of the season, and appeared to be very confident and arrogant. The woman was enchanting and wore fashionable clothes, looking like a model who had just walked down a runway. Hearing their conversation, the Caucasian man laughed out loud and looked at Fang Xingjian with a hint of disdain in his gaze. "Young lad, do you know where you've come to? Even Hollywood's top stars and Europe's superstars wouldn't dare to say something like this." The man who was looking down on Fang Xingjian was called Ford. He was a famous director of entertainment programs, and many of ABC television station's top programs were managed by him. He had a wide network of connections and was very famous in both the television station and the entertainment industry. He said in an old-fashioned manner, "It's better to be careful when you speak here. Otherwise, you won't even know how you've been neglected. It's not that easy to survive in this industry." After saying this, Ford smiled and looked at Catherine. "Miss Catherine, this friend of yours doesn't seem to know much about this industry." It turned out that he knew Catherine. He had long since coveted Catherine, who was both an international model and a wealthy young lady. Regardless of whether it was her appearance or figure, he had rarely seen anyone like her. Moreover, she was the young lady of a real estate tycoon. Therefore, when he saw the two of them appearing here, as if they were a couple, he could not help but suppress Fang Xingjian. Catherine looked at Ford with a cold expression and said, "Mr. Ford, please apologize to Mr. Fang immediately. Otherwise, you'll be making an enemy out of our Douglas family." "What?" Ford had not expected Catherine's reaction to be so intense. He said in shock and anger, "Catherine, do you know what you're saying?" Ford was a veteran of the television station. He had people on the board of directors, and he even had a portion of his shares as a reward. He also had many television stars and hosts who were his students. He could be said to be a veteran of the ABC television station. So how could he tolerate Catherine ridiculing him like this? No matter how powerful the Douglas family is, they won't be able to control the ABC television station. His female companion was also a new host of the television station. She had sweet looks, a sexy figure, and was dressed in branded clothes. Hearing that, she smiled coldly and said, "Catherine, don't be too arrogant. This isn't your Douglas family's property. If you continue spouting nonsense, the two of you can forget about appearing on any of the ABC television station's programs in the future." It'll be difficult for you to do anything. Ford nodded arrogantly. It might be difficult for him to ban Catherine, but with his influence in the ABC television station, he could easily ban this young man whom he had never seen before. Clearly, as staff members of the television station, the two of them were not aware of the intense changes that had taken place in the West Coast underworld over the past few days. However, just as he was about to say something, a cold snort rang out from Fong Xingjian's mouth. The air suddenly became as oppressive as the deep sea, and Ford and the female host dropped to their knees with a thud. It was as if they were mice that had encountered a tiger, and the stench of urine wafted out from between their legs. What's there to say? Catherine, you must learn how to ignore ants. Fong Xingjian let out a cold snort and then turned to leave. There's no need to explain. Just step over them. After saying that, he walked toward the television station's hall with Catherine, leaving Ford and the female host kneeling on the ground with pale countenances. Their eyes were filled with fury and warped expressions. Mr. Ford? What's wrong? Mr. Ford? Did you incontinence? Do you need me to call a doctor for you? Mr. Ford, let me help you up. After being watched by the crowd at the entrance for over 10 minutes, he was finally able to stand up after someone helped him up. He escaped into the office dejectedly with the female host, quickly wiped himself down, and changed his clothes. Damn it! What on earth happened? Ford was still baffled and enraged. He could not understand the reason why he had dropped to his knees in incontinence, but he knew that this matter must have something to do with that Asian young man. After cursing in the office for 5 minutes, he immediately picked up his phone, planning to make a call to investigate that Asian man's identity and prepare to take revenge. After making a few calls and giving instructions, he sat down in his chair, still feeling indignant. He had never been so humiliated in the 20 years he had been working at the television station. Just then his cell phone rang. When Ford saw the caller ID, he immediately put on a respectful expression and said, "Hello, Chairman. I got it. All right, I got it." After hanging up the call, he wore a surprised expression. To think that even the chairman has come personally. What kind of distinguished guest is it? Shaking his head, he immediately stood up and headed for the conference room. The moment he entered the conference room, he discovered that the few main hosts, directors, as well as a few directors and general managers of the management, and even the presidents of a few studios, laboratories, and development departments were all present. It was an unprecedented lineup. Ford walked up to a familiar host and asked, "Hi, Jamie. Why is there such a big event? Do you know what's going on?" "I don't know." The host, who was called Jamie, shrugged and said, "But I heard that some big client has come. Even the chairman has gone to welcome him personally." The chairman has gone to welcome him personally? Could it be that it's an exclusive live broadcast? That can't be right. Even the chairman wouldn't have gone there. Or could it be that someone wants to buy over the company? Ford shook his head, feeling a little confused. He had never experienced such a grand reception before. Just then, the door to the conference room opened, and the chairman walked in. Behind him, Catherine and Fong Xingjian were following behind him. The three of them were casually chatting, but it was clear that the chairman was expressing his goodwill. What kind of joke was this? The biggest shareholder of ABC was the Disney company, and the current chairman was Disney's chairman and CEO, Robert Iger. And what kind of monster was Disney? They had countless subsidiaries, a total of over 200,000 employees, and assets of close to $100 billion US. Seeing how Ford was trying to curry favor with Fong Xingjian and Catherine, Ford's eyes almost popped out. Who on earth have I offended? Cold sweat trickled down Ford's back unknowingly. Chapter 750. However, the fear and uneasiness in Ford's heart did not attract the attention of Fong Xingjian and the others. Everything was still going according to Fong Xingjian's plan. Although it was unknown how many benefits and threats Elena and Alan Douglas had given the ABC television station, the entire television station had indeed cooperated with Fong Xingjian's plan. Of course, the television station's plan was just the first step in Fong Xingjian's plan. After all, this was far from enough if he wanted to influence the entire world. This was just the beginning, a warm-up. That night, in the Pentagon, the United States Secretary of Defense, Edward, was frowning as he looked at the report before him. An unprecedented underworld empire had developed on the United States West Coast. Furthermore, the other party had extraordinary humans who could go up against the military and had even defeated the elites of the law enforcing department. How could Edward sleep at night with such an existence in his own country? Edward was extremely hesitant about whether to fight or to recruit them. If he were to fight, with the other party's strength and influence, it would probably turn into a local war. Even if he were to win, he would suffer great losses. After all, it would be a war in their own territory, and it would be in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco, which were extremely prosperous. However, if he were to not fight and allow this influence to continue growing, no one in the upper echelons would be able to accept such an outcome. Just then, an assistant walked into the office anxiously and said, "Sir, quickly turn on the television." "What?" Edward berated unhappily. "How can I have the time to watch television?" The assistant turned on his phone and played a video. At the start, Edward had wanted to reprimand the assistant. However, after watching for a short while, he was completely captivated by the content of the video, and his countenance kept changing. In the studio, a talk show was going on. The beautiful female host smiled and asked, "Mr. Fong Xinjian, you're saying that you have superpowers?" Fong Xinjian, who was on the left, replied, "Yes." With his reply, everyone present laughed. The beautiful host also shook her head helplessly, looked at the three guests on the right, and asked, "Professor Barn, what do you think of superpowers?" Professor Barn, who was from Stanford University's physics department, was a white-haired old man. As a well-known physicist, he had long lost his physical strength and inspiration for research due to his age. However, the achievements he had obtained when he was young were enough for him to squander for the rest of his life. In recent years, he had appeared on many TV shows and was known as a celebrity physicist. Professor Barn looked at Fong Xinjian with a mocking gaze and said, "It's already the 21st century, and humans have been on the moon for so many years. However, I've never thought that there would still be people who believe in superpowers. In the Middle Ages, people believed in witchcraft and alchemy. In modern times, with the development of science, people began to believe in superpowers. But at the end of the day, this was just because humans had different understandings of nature, which resulted in different fantasies. It was common knowledge that none of the so-called superpower research organizations had achieved any substantial results. They were nothing more than scams to deceive fools. And you're the same. Below the stage, Ford frowned, threw a glance at Catherine, and asked in an ingratiating manner, "Miss Catherine, is this all right?" From his point of view, the program that Fong Xinjian had arranged was simply insulting him like a clown. Could it be that he wanted to rely on this kind of hype to become popular? However, acting stupid and shameless was already an outdated method of creating hype, right? Right now, the audience was very immune to such things. Catherine threw a glance at Ford. A hint of contempt flashed in her eyes when she saw how Ford had been treating her with disdain and how respectful he was now. "It's fine. Just watch," Catherine thought to herself. "There's no questioning, no attacks, and no objections. How can it be seen as correct? But is this really good?" Once the program was broadcasted, the various influences would probably put pressure on them very quickly, especially the government. This went against the policy of hiding extraordinary powers all along. Would the Douglas family really be able to get through this? It was just that Catherine did not know what Fong Xinjian's plans were after leaving the television station. However, there was no other way now. Catherine looked at Fong Xinjian. Right now, the entire Douglas family had been tied to him. Their powers were all bestowed upon them by Fong Xinjian, so there was no way they could go against his wishes. On the stage, the host continued to ask, "Chris, what do you think?" Chris was a beautiful middle-aged married woman. In the past, she had been the female lead of a television series and had become very popular throughout the country. However, the subsequent few works she had produced were not very popular, causing her to be a little out of fashion. Hearing the host question, Chris smiled and said, "I believe in superpowers. I've personally seen someone bend a soup spoon using psychokinesis." Perhaps there are still some mysterious powers in the human body. Professor Barron said in disdain, "It's just some magic tricks." "Chris, you've been tricked." "Maybe, Professor Barron." Chris chuckled and said, "But I still feel that Earth with mysterious powers is more romantic. It would be even better if there were werewolves and vampires." The female host then asked the last guest, "Andy, do you think that there are superpowers in this world?" Andy was a black-haired young man wearing a suit. He was a magician who had recently risen to fame in Las Vegas. Despite his young age, he already had his own show in Las Vegas. Andy said, "I don't have superpowers, but I know that there are magic in this world." He stretched out his hand, and a coin suddenly appeared. Following that, the coin flickered and jumped back and forth between his left and right hands, as if it was being controlled from a distance. This series of performances caused everyone present to clap. After doing all this, Andy threw a provocative glance at Fong Xingjian and said, "I hope that your performance later can surpass this." Regardless of whether it was Professor Barron's sharp rebuttal, Chris's act of acting dumb and cute, or Magician Andy's act of making use of the opportunity to perform magic tricks, all of the three guest goals were simply to gain some fame through the program. Who would really care about Fong Xingjian's superpowers? However, Fong Xingjian did not care. He had only asked someone to call some random people over to increase his impression through comparison. This was just the first step of his plan. There were not many people watching the show in front of their televisions. Most of the people who saw the topic of superpowers immediately changed the channel. With the advancement of technology, there were fewer and fewer people who believed in superpowers. This guy must be an idiot. It's another person who has gone crazy from wanting to become famous. Let Professor Barron give him a good scolding. Why are all sorts of lunatics allowed to appear in television stations nowadays? Chris is really beautiful. Chapter 751. Putting aside the reactions of the viewers in front of the televisions. After the three guests finished speaking, Fong Xingjian said calmly, "I can demonstrate my superpower on the spot to explain." "Oh." The female host's eyes lit up. This would clearly be the highlight of the show. She could already imagine what kind of ridicule and attacks Fong Xingjian would receive after his superpower failed and was exposed. This was something that many viewers would like to see. Although the host had been called in at the last minute to record a show and did not know Fong Xingjian, she still carried on with the show according to her own habits and rhythm. The female host said, "Then how does Mr. Fong intend to prove it?" "It's very simple." Fong Xingjian did not continue to pester her. He raised his hand and lifted everyone in the room in an instant. Almost in an instant, everyone present seemed to have lost their sense of gravity and directly floated a meter into the air. There were screams and curses. It was a simple action, but almost everyone present, except for Catherine, panicked. Secretary of Defense Edward slammed his palm on the table and said angrily, "What are they doing? Inform ABC TV immediately to stop broadcasting this show. Also, who is this extraordinary human? Why is he on the television station?" The president of ABC Radio and Television Company, Robert Iger, was sitting in his office and watching the show on television. His secretary hurried in and said, "Boss, there's a call from the Pentagon." Robert Iger helplessly looked at the sofa next to him. Jack was lying there peacefully. Thinking of the terrifying superpower that Jack had performed, he said helplessly, "Just tell them I'm not around." At the same time, as everyone in the studio floated up, the show's viewership ratings also started to rise slightly. In an apartment in New York, a middle-aged man was eating French fries while watching the television and said in surprise, "A television show actually has such good special effects." Outside a farm in Texas, a burly man watched the video on his cell phone and said, "This magic trick is pretty good." In a villa in California, a housewife had just watched the channel. When she saw the guests flying around, she laughed and said, "What show is this? It's so interesting." At this time, the studio was in a mess. The female host exclaimed, "Oh my God, am I dreaming? What did you do?" Chris shouted, "Is there a wire hanging me? I've never heard of such a scene before." However, Professor Barron was astonished. He touched his body all over and asked, "How did you guys do it? Is it the latest 3D technology?" Magician Andy looked around. "Everyone, don't panic. This should be some kind of magic trick. Everyone check your surroundings. There should be some kind of mechanism." In front of the television, a fatso laughed and said, "These guys are really good at acting." In a university dormitory, a girl looked at the video on the computer and asked curiously, "Is this the trailer of some movie?" In the studio, Fong Xingjian continued to speak calmly. "I've said it before. This is my superpower, and this ability can be obtained through learning." As he spoke, countless equipment, tables, chairs, and lights flew into the air. In fact, Fong Xingjian's voice was not only transmitted through the air, but it was also directly ringing in the other party's mind. The scene in front of them completely destroyed the values that they had built up since they were young. "No, this is impossible. What on earth did you do? Have I been hypnotized? Or is there something wrong with the entire studio from the very beginning?" Baran continued to look at the scene in disbelief. As a well-known scientist, everything before him went against his common sense. Fong Xingjian said calmly, "Do you think that there's something wrong with the studio? Then what about this?" As they spoke, the outer walls of the entire studio began to disintegrate. Then the outer walls of the offices and workrooms flew all the way. In the end, even the outer walls of the entire building flew off together, exposing the entire studio to the moonlight. Looking at the scenery outside, Professor Baran fell completely silent. This, Magician Andy's mind was also blank. Actress Chris cried out in astonishment, "Oh my God." Following that, Fong Xingjian said calmly, "Superpowers can be cultivated. Next, I'll be talking about the cultivation method." More and more people started to watch the show in front of their televisions. What is this? What amazing special effects. Is this ABC's new television series? I'm definitely going to get it. The acting skills of the few guests aren't bad either. It feels like it's real. Who is that Asian? Is he the main character? The ordinary people still did not take the scene before them seriously, and not many people really started to record down the cultivation method that Fong Xingjian was talking about. However, in the world of extraordinary powers, it was as if everything was being engulfed by a tempest. In a hotel in Los Angeles, Tang Song, who possessed the heavenly immortal system, was wearing a bathrobe as he stared at the television. What a guy. This person is really gutsy. But he's also really stupid. The United States Law Enforcement Department won't let him off. How many ordinary people would believe him? But why would he want to spread such a set of sword technique? Could it be that his system needs it? In a small supermarket, Tom took on an incorporeal form and hid behind a shop assistant, looking at the scene on the television without blinking. Idiot. He's simply courting death. In the Dark Knight's underground base in New York, the Dark Knight was also looking at Fong Xingjian in the video. He frowned and asked, "Nicola, have you found this person's information?" "No. I've gone through all the residence files and criminal records, but there's nothing about him. He's not a citizen of the United States, nor is he a person with extraordinary abilities. A new extraordinary ability user from abroad. A new extraordinary ability user from another country?" The Dark Knight stroked his chin and said, "But there's no need to care about him. The law enforcing department won't let him off either. We can just leave the control of public opinion to the government." Right now, he had too many things to do. He had just saved and treated Son of God, Caesar, and was still searching for traces of extraterrestrial life forms. He had yet to finish concocting the newest hell armor. So how could he have the time to care about a new extraordinary ability user? However, at that moment, footsteps rang out. The Dark Knight turned and saw that it was Caesar, who had been saved from the geosynchronous orbit. Seeing Caesar, the Dark Knight's eyes lit up. "Caesar, you're awake?" Caesar's eyes were fixed on the screen, as if he had seen something unbelievable. The Dark Knight frowned and asked, "What's wrong?" Caesar said abruptly, "It's him. He's the one who attacked me on the sun." Chapter 752. In the Pentagon, the Secretary of Defense, Edward, exhaled softly The television signal has been cut off? All right, send someone to the ABC television station immediately. Also, inform all the other media outlets that I don't want to see any more related reports. Pay attention to the internet as well. Block all related information and videos. Send people to Twitter, Facebook, and all the other major websites. Push the matter of the program as special effects. Just as he was giving out many instructions, a military officer walked in and said, "Sir, there's a call from the Radiant Congress." Edward's gaze narrowed, and a hint of helplessness flashed in his eyes. A call from the Radiant Congress. This was probably one of the calls he did not want to pick up the most in his life. It was because each time he picked up a call, he would encounter an unprecedented problem. Elsewhere, Fang Xingjian had already walked out of the television station building with Catherine. Behind them were countless staff members who were in awe. These people had personally witnessed the existence of supernatural powers today. Catherine said, "The government has already cut off the television signal. Their reaction is even more intense than we imagined." "What about the internet?" Fang Xingjian asked. Catherine let out a bitter laugh and said, "Although it's still being spread, most people probably don't believe it. The people who download the sword technique are just looking at it. There's no one who cultivates it." Fang Xingjian had expected this. He lifted his head and looked at the bright moon in the sky, saying calmly, "Don't worry. Let's warm it up for 3 days first. 3 days later, everyone will be fighting to cultivate this set of sword technique." Fang Xingjian naturally knew that the influence of the video and television alone was far from sufficient in the United States, let alone on a global scale. Moreover, the government's reaction was even more intense than he had imagined. However, Fang Xingjian had long since taken precautions against this. The sword technique information that was being broadcasted on television, videos, and the internet were just warm-up actions. It was just the beginning. Following that, although Fang Xingjian's video was blocked on the internet, it was like all videos that had been blocked. The program's video was still widely spread. Many forums and countless netizens were debating whether the video was real or fake. Even related videos had spread to Asia, Europe, and Africa, causing a wider range of debates. It could be said that in less than 12 hours, this incident had become the hottest news at present. "Idiot, how could this video be real? Do you really think superpowers exist?" He even demolished the entire building. "You must have watched too much Marvel." Someone immediately retorted, "I was next to the TV station building that day. I saw the entire process of the studio disintegrating." There are so many idiots. I haven't even said that the superpower user is me. Someone posted a photo of the scene and added, "I'm an employee of ABC. This is the photo I took at the time." Superpowers really exist in our world. Looking at the photos that have been posted, looking at the flying walls and the empty building, someone exclaimed in surprise, "The video is real? Are there really superpowers?" But soon, more fake reviewers began to criticize the authenticity of the photos. "This is too fake. It's obviously photoshopped. The rendering effect is too much. Even the shadows are crooked." There were even people who edited the video second by second, coming up with all sorts of reasons that could not be real. After all, the existence of superpowers went against common sense and views for most people in modern society. If they were to admit the existence of superpowers, they would probably have to see it with their own eyes or have extremely solid evidence. Otherwise, most people would only suspect that it was made with computer special effects when they saw the video. Moreover, there were many fake reviewers from the United States government responsible for stirring up trouble, further reducing the authenticity of the program and the video. However, there was still a small group of people who insisted that the video was real and that superpowers existed. But soon, someone found new evidence. What's there to argue about? ABC has released an announcement. The previous program was the trailer of the new series Superpowers. So it's a trailer. Haha, I knew it was fake. ABC is really good at it. The special effects of this show are great. I'm going to follow it. Most people were persuaded by this announcement. Many people even took screenshots of it and used it to slap their faces. However, it was different from how most people in the mortal world were gradually persuaded and the supernatural incident gradually subsided. In the world of extraordinary humans, there were surging undercurrents, and it was as if a storm was brewing. On the Extraordinary Humans Forum, the Door of Darkness, many pieces of news regarding the Douglas family were spreading out. Within a short span of over half a month, they had unified all the criminal organizations in the United States West Coast, amassed over $1 trillion worth of assets, and even gathered over 20 extraordinary humans. What a terrifying force this was. The female tyrant, Elena. She's probably the strongest person in the United States now. This matter is also being pushed by the Douglas family behind the scenes. What are they trying to do? Right now, the Douglas family has over 20 extraordinary humans. In terms of extraordinary powers, they might have already surpassed the United States Law Enforcing Department. Elena is also an existence whose physical body can surpass the speed of sound. Don't forget about that Fong Xingjian. Judging from his performance in the program, his abilities might not be any weaker than Elena's. T. If he's really stronger than Elena, he'd be the one staying behind the scenes while Elena is brought to the forefront. But no matter what, the Douglas family has already become a great power. The United States government probably won't dare to make a move against them easily. Just as countless extraordinary humans thought that the United States government would tolerate the Douglas family's existence, just like how they tolerated the Radiant Congress and the various military-industrial complexes in the country. Within a short few days, the situation in the western part of the United States had changed, shocking countless people. The United States Pacific Fleet appeared 200 kilometers away from the West Coast. A large number of land forces appeared outside Los Angeles. Supersonic fighter jets appeared frequently in the sky above Beverly Hills. At the sight of this scene, many extraordinary humans turned pale with fright. Even China, Russia, the United Kingdom, and France were alarmed to ask the United States for the reason. However, there was no response from the United States. There were even people in the know who claimed that the United States' several nuclear missile silos had entered the highest state of alert. This was a blatant threat, but no one could be sure who they were threatening. Are they going to start a civil war? To think that even the Pacific Fleet has been mobilized? Could it be that they're really going to take action against the Douglas family? How is that possible? The United States Pacific Fleet was a terrifying military force that the United States used to deter Southeast Asia and look down on the entire Pacific Ocean. It had a total of 6 aircraft carrier groups, several tens of battleships of various grades, and over 50,000 soldiers. This was the strongest military force on Earth. It was an existence that could suppress an entire country single-handedly. Thereafter, aircrafts flew past the sky above Beverly Hills, and a large number of soldiers appeared faintly in the vicinity of the Douglas family's manor and the Silver Shield Tower. Looking at the movements of the Pacific Fleet, someone sighed in astonishment. The Douglas family is finished. Yes, although it was hard to imagine, from the various signs, the United States series of actions were really targeted at the new rising underworld empire in their country. Although the Douglas family was currently extremely powerful, when the United States really sent out even the Pacific Fleet, seemingly determined to wipe out this influence, no one would doubt the battle prowess of the world's strongest country. Chapter 753. The Douglas family was finished. These were the thoughts of all the extraordinary humans in the know. Even many ordinary soldiers and middle-ranking generals of the United States Army would not feel any anxiety before battle. It was because, in their opinion, there was no influence on this planet that could go up against the Pacific Fleet. Even the most ignorant and ill-informed criminal organizations could sense that the situation was not right. They could smell the calm before the storm. A large number of places and companies were raided by the police and the FBI. The criminal organization's influences in Los Angeles continued to be dealt a blow, and all the police officers seemed to have gone crazy. A large number of armed special forces and Marines patrolled the streets. It was as if the Third World War was about to break out. The prisons in California had never been as packed as they were today. It was also at this moment that the countless arrogant criminal organizations understood how terrifying the government was when it got serious. Once the government was willing to bear the losses, the influences that they were so proud of would have no way of putting up any resistance. In Catherine's villa, the phone rang once again. "Hello, boss, this is bad. Our company has also been sealed, and everyone has been taken away by the police. Our subordinates are all panicking." Elena switched off the phone and casually tossed it into the pond. This was already the 10th call for help today. However, all the extraordinary humans, including her, had been restrained by Feng Xinjian in the manor, forbidding them from going into direct conflict with the government. Could it be that teacher is afraid as well? Elena narrowed her eyes and looked at the back of that man on the lawn. She could not help but think, it's fine if it's the ordinary police or military, but if it's the Pacific Fleet. Thinking of the unrivaled fleet that had suppressed the entire Pacific Ocean and suppressed the countries in Southeast Asia to the point where they could not even raise their heads, Elena could only let out a deep sigh. What kind of concept was an aircraft carrier? It was something that could flatten a city from several hundred kilometers away. For example, if the Pacific Fleet was 200 kilometers away from the West Coast, the carrier-based aircraft on it would be able to cover almost the entire west coast of the United States. There was also their scouting ability. The United States military prowess was too powerful and advanced. The electronic warfare aircraft and unmanned surveillance aircraft that they were using could form images of ground targets through the aircraft's radars. A single surveillance aircraft would be able to monitor enemy forces within a range of 50,000 square kilometers. Right now, there are countless unmanned surveillance aircraft in Los Angeles, and they will be able to observe any ground targets that they were interested in real time. Then, as long as the fleet was willing, they could use missiles or carrier-based aircraft to bombard the target. All kinds of super bombs, fuel-air explosives, incendiary bombs, and earth-penetrating bombs were enough to destroy any fortification in the world. Even an expert like Elena would find it hard to escape if she was targeted by a few supersonic or subsonic guided missiles. Putting aside the many tactical nuclear missiles, fuel-air explosive missiles, and armor-piercing missiles, even an ordinary Tomahawk cruise missile would be enough to injure her. Dozens of them were fired in one go. Even if she didn't die, she would lose a layer of skin. She wouldn't even be able to get close to the fleet. Even if Elena were to find a chance to get close to the fleet and dash up to the aircraft carriers, it would be hard for her to cause great damage. After all, the special steel used to build the aircraft carriers was something that even missiles would find hard to destroy. Even if Elena were to dismantle it with her bare hands for an hour, she might not be able to sink the aircraft carriers. At the thought of the Pacific Fleet that was several hundred kilometers away, Elena's heart felt extremely heavy. As all the extraordinary humans in the Douglas family fell silent, all of the criminal organizations in Los Angeles gave up on resisting. In the blink of an eye, a criminal empire that had just risen up seemed to be on the verge of collapse. However, unlike the middle and lower echelons who were at ease and absolutely confident, the many members of the Department of Defense and the White House's upper echelons were filled with worry. It was because they had found out from the Dark Knight about Feng Xinjian's identity. He was an extraordinary human whose strength was comparable to son of God Caesar. The Dark Knight did not tell them that Feng Xinjian was actually the suspected extraterrestrial life form on the sun. However, just the fact that he was comparable to son of God Caesar was enough to make the United States government's scalp turn numb. If they were to be told the truth, the Dark Knight was worried that some members of the government's upper echelon would give up on resisting. By then, just the internal strife alone would waste a lot of time. As for why the extraterrestrials would take on the appearance of humans, the Dark Knight and the others could not be bothered to look into it. Despite this, the series of actions that the government was taking seemed to be overwhelming to ordinary people, crushing the Douglas family like a thunderbolt. However, they were the only ones who knew that they were merely putting on a show of force, showing that they were willing to perish together with Feng Xinjian. After all, if they were to really fight with Feng Xinjian, even if they were able to defeat him, the entire Los Angeles would probably be turned into ruins. No one would be able to accept such an outcome. Therefore, the United States government planned to join forces with the Radiant Congress to suppress Feng Xingjian. This was why they had mobilized so much military force right from the start, putting on a good show. Over 10 kilometers away from the manor, Tang Song, who possessed the heavenly immortal system, was observing the situation in the manor. Regardless of whether it's a battle or a peace, it'll be in the next 2 days. How can I miss out on such a great show? Just as he was monitoring the manor with great interest and great curiosity, a black sedan drove up to the manor's entrance. A series of black-clothed men opened the doors and walked in. However, the next few people who appeared caused Tang Song's brows to twitch fiercely, revealing an extremely grim expression. Dark Knight Peter, son of God Caesar, and that. Is that Abyss Lord Suleiman? Also, who are that child and that woman? As a core member of the Crimson Alliance, Tang Song was naturally very familiar with the strongest experts in this world. Seeing the Dark Knight, Caesar, and Suleiman appearing one after another, his eyes filled with astonishment. What kind of joke is this? Each of these 3 people possesses the power to destroy an entire country. To think that all of them have appeared, it's just a Douglas family. Is there really a need for this? Right now, Tang Song felt as if he had seen a super soldier who had dominated the Middle East and massacred Africa. To think that he had gone to a kindergarten in the capital to beat up a girl from a small class. With the Pacific Fleet on the outside and the Radiant Congress's 3 magnates on the inside, the Douglas family is doomed. Unless, Tang Song narrowed his eyes, unless the Douglas family's hidden forces can defeat them. But, is that possible? At the thought of this, he smiled and shook his head. If the Douglas family could do this and defeat the Radiant Congress's 3 magnates in addition to the Pacific Fleet, then there would basically be no problems for them to unify the world. Tang Song did not believe that such a person would suddenly appear in this world. Or rather, it could be said that it was possible. However, in his opinion, the possibility was too low, so low that it could be ignored. As Tang Song thought about this, his eyes lit up. It's unlikely that there's an unrivaled expert. Instead, it seems like the other party has some kind of super weapon or treasure and is forcing the Douglas family to hand it over with a great army. Chapter 754. Tang Song thought of how a few small countries had developed nuclear weapons in the past, as well as how an extraordinary human had suddenly gotten his hands on a super zombie virus 2 to 3 years ago. Wasn't that scene of a great army pressing in and pressuring them exactly the same as what he was seeing now? Tang Song was even more certain of this when he thought of how the Douglas family had been producing extraordinary humans recently. Could it be that there's something that can activate the system or increase the system's prowess? I shall see what kind of treasure it is. At the thought of this, Tang Song smiled coldly and performed an invisibility spell he had exchanged from a system. He turned into a gust of breeze and blew toward the manor. His invisibility spell was something that could truly change one's life essence, turning them into a substance that had a 99% penetrative rate of electromagnetic waves. There were almost no detection methods on Earth that could find him. This was also one of the reasons why he had been so confident all this while. While Tang Song was sneaking into the manor, Tom had turned into an incorporeal form on the other side of the manor. He was strolling leisurely around the manor. Compared to Tang Song's invisibility spell, his incorporeal form was probably even harder to detect. He was scanning the manor's surroundings and seeing all sorts of soldiers, Marines, and special forces. The more he looked at them, the more the corners of his lips curled up. He could not help but feel amused. The Douglas family had destroyed all his hard work and wiped out several hundred of his subordinates. How could he not feel hatred toward them? Especially when Elena had broken his body into 2, he hated them to the core. Now that he saw the United States government's army pressing in, the various gangs being wiped out, and the many extraordinary humans being trapped in the manor, how could he not be happy? How could he not be excited? He had specially come here today to take a look at the Douglas family and Elena's tragic end. After Elena puts up a desperate resistance and gets seriously injured, I might even be able to find a chance to make a move. At the thought of this, Tom could not help but smile coldly. Just then, 3 black sedans stopped at the manor's entrance. Although Tom did not recognize any of the people who alighted from the sedans, there was no doubt that these people who had entered the manor were all sent by the United States government. As expected, they're here to call for surrender. Tom mumbled to himself at the sight of this scene. In his opinion, it was impossible for the United States government to start a war within their own territory. The greatest possibility was for them to pick up the Douglas family and then let it go lightly, calling for surrender. So he followed the team into the manor, wondering if he could gain any benefits from this operation. But these guys should also be superhumans from the government, right? Otherwise, why would he rush over to negotiate with Elena? It's a good opportunity to see the strength of the government's superhumans. While thinking of this, Tom had already followed the Dark Knight and the others into the manor's hall. In the hall, Elena, Catherine, Jack, and over 20 other extraordinary humans were already on standby. In the middle of them all, Feng Xingjian was sitting on the sofa. Even the arrival of the Dark Knight and the others were unable to stir up any change in his expression. However, when he saw Caesar, the Son of God, his eyes flickered slightly. "Oh, are you awake?" Caesar snorted coldly. His muscles and bones shook a little, but he didn't say anything. The Dark Knight walked to the front and said, "Hello, sir. Earth is our home. As an intelligent civilization, we welcome the visits of any other civilizations and are willing to show our greatest friendship. But, if necessary, we won't be stingy with any military arrangements." Hearing the Dark Knight's words, Catherine and the others were a little stunned. What did this mean? The other party's target was not the Douglas family? It was just Feng Xingjian? Moreover, why did these words sound as if they were being said to aliens? Military force? However, Feng Xingjian said calmly, "If I were to really use military force, you guys can forget about appearing here." A representative of the United States government walked out from behind the Dark Knight and said arrogantly, "Feng Xingjian, the Radiant Congress and our government have already joined forces. Right now, you're not just facing 5 powerful, extraordinary humans. You're also facing the entire United States government. The Pacific Fleet, which was 500 kilometers away, is ready to set off. Over 100 supersonic fighter aircrafts are ready to take off at any moment. Over 2,000 of the most elite land forces have already surrounded this place. At least 10 intercontinental missiles are aimed at you. The White House and the Pentagon have also given orders. As long as there's a need, we'll use nuclear weapons." As the official said this, his countenance turned cold, and his tone was filled with killing intent. Compared to what the Dark Knight had said, everyone present understood what this official was saying. With each sentence he said, the countenances of Catherine, Elena, and the others turned pale. When he mentioned the use of nuclear weapons, the countenances of the many extraordinary humans from the Douglas family turned pale, and their morale dropped to an extremely low level. None of them had expected that the United States government would be so determined to use nuclear weapons. Linda stood next to Catherine, feeling like she was going to collapse. To begin with, she was just a celebrity who had obtained a beauty system. After being researched and upgraded by Feng Xingjian, she had only obtained a set of beauty sword technique. It mainly focused on bewitching and creating illusions. She had never been a frontline combatant. Hearing the official's words, she could not help but gasp. "How dare you? How many people are there in Los Angeles? How dare you use nuclear weapons?" That official lifted his neck and said coldly, "The United States will never compromise. If you're unwilling to surrender, we won't compromise even if we have to sacrifice Los Angeles." Hearing the other party's reply, Linda's body went limp, and she almost fell to the ground, losing all of her strength. However, the official's words were, of course, threats and scares. This official had been so overbearing right from the start, scaring everyone so that they would have an advantage in the subsequent negotiations. It was also a commonly used tactic in negotiations. However, With the Pacific Fleet heading over and the military surrounding Beverly Hills, this threat was unprecedentedly powerful. It was hard to not believe it. This kind of psychological pressure was a common tactic used by the government. The United States fleet had dominated the seven seas, and they had suppressed countless countries with this method. Just by wandering around and putting on a show, they would be able to scare the leaders of many small countries into trembling. However, no matter what the officials said, the Dark Knight, Caesar, and Suleiman's gazes remained fixed on Feng Xingjian from the beginning to the end. When they saw that Feng Xingjian's expression and gaze did not change in the slightest, a hint of disappointment appeared in their eyes. As expected, he doesn't care about the prowess of Earth's military forces at all. Although the Dark Knight had expected this, he still felt a hint of disappointment. Just then, Feng Xingjian finally spoke. He said calmly, "Let me ask you a question. The one hiding behind the door and the one lying on the ground outside the window, are these two people from your side as well? If they aren't, I'll get rid of them first. They're too wretched and irritating." Chapter 755. What? Hearing Feng Xingjian's words, many people present were astonished. How many experts were there? How many experts were there? Putting aside the fact that there were Elena, Catherine, Jack, and the others on Feng Xingjian's side, as well as the various surveillance devices in the United States for almost 24 hours. Son of God Adam, Dark Knight Peter, and Abyss Lord Suleiman. Their systems belonged to superpowers, technology, and magic respectively. They could be said to be among the strongest experts back then. Even if they were not in the top 3, they would at least be in the top 5. However, after Feng Xingjian said this, there was still no one who discovered Tang Song and Tom's existence. It was because Tang Song's invisibility art and Tom's incorporeal form were too strange. However, as long as they were given 2 to 3 seconds, they would be able to find the two of them through various detection means. However, at the same time as Feng Xingjian said this, Tang Song had already started to retreat. It should be said that when Feng Xingjian said this, both of their hearts trembled violently, and their countenances turned pale. It was because they had never met an expert who could sense their presence so easily. Tang Song's invisibility art could penetrate through 99% of electromagnetic waves. Almost all visible light, infrared rays, and electrical signals would just pass through his body. They would not be able to see or detect him at all. Tom's incorporeal form was even more mysterious. He had completely turned himself into a life form in the form of waves. Not only could he not be seen or touched, but he could even pass through walls through diffraction. It was because they possessed such a skill that they had the confidence to sneak into the manor. It was a pity that Feng Xingjian was a Tier 3 Divine level expert. Even Tier 1 Divine level experts' martial wills were able to enter the microscopic world and scan for the existence of spatial gaps, let alone the current Feng Xingjian. Almost at the moment the two of them entered the manor, Feng Xingjian discovered their existence. Then he saw the two of them walking around as if there was no one else around, acting without the slightest restraints. Tang Song's countenance changed, and he retreated rapidly. However, Tom took a step back and came to an abrupt stop. It was because he suddenly felt that Feng Xingjian was not trying to trick him. It was because he really had not found a way to detect Feng Xingjian's illusory state. He also found it hard to believe that someone could detect his existence and even attack him. Tang Song's speed was very fast. Almost as soon as Feng Xingjian spoke, his entire body seemed to have merged with a gust of strong wind. In a few seconds, he had drifted thousands of meters away along with the wind. My Sun Wind follower can merge with the wind, making my body as light as a breeze. Not only is it hard to detect, but my movements are also swift. He might not be able to catch me. In the blink of an eye, Tang Song had traveled 1,000 meters and arrived at the top of a building. Seeing that no one was chasing after him, he heaved a sigh of relief. Just as he flew 1,000 meters away, Feng Xingjian finally stood up from the sofa. The moment he stood up, Caesar, the son of God, also took a step forward. "What are you doing?" They hadn't sensed Tang's song and Tom's presence. They thought that Fong Xingjian was going to suddenly stand up and attack. However, at the next moment, Fong Xingjian took a step forward and suddenly disappeared. Tang's song landed on the top of the building. Just as he was about to heave a sigh of relief, he realized that Fong Xingjian's back was facing him. Fong Xingjian was looking at the moon in the sky, as if he had been waiting for him. So fast, Tang Song's eyes narrowed. Just as he was about to fly back again, he realized that Fong Xingjian had also disappeared. Immediately after, he felt a grip around his neck. He was already in Fong Xingjian's hand. He wanted to activate his battle prowess to resist, but he suddenly realized that his body had gone limp and he was unable to move. Following that, strong gales blew, accompanied by thunderous explosions. The two of them had already returned to the entrance of the hall, bringing along strong gales. The strong gales caused the rows of hidden warriors to sway. Even now, Tom was still hiding at the entrance. Others might not be able to see him, but in Fong Xingjian's eyes, Tom was like a fool, half squatting at the entrance. "Do you think I'm a fool?" With a bang, Fong Xingjian kicked Tom's back, and the latter let out an agonizing cry as he was sent flying. To think that he'd been kicked from his incorporeal form back to his corporeal form by Fong Xingjian's kick. He fell face first on the ground, and then Fong Xingjian stepped on his back, making him unable to move. Tom struggled crazily, and the muscles all over his body swelled up abruptly. The power he had inherited from the werewolves and the hellhounds erupted crazily. However, he felt that the foot on his back was as heavy as Mount Tai, and he was unable to break free. When Elena saw Tom, who had suddenly been kicked out from void space by Fong Xingjian, her eyes lit up, and she said, "Teacher, he's that Tom." "Oh, that's him." Fong Xingjian looked at Tom, who was under his feet, with a calm expression. It was as if a pair of tongs that he had been looking for in the kitchen for a very long time had suddenly appeared. His series of actions seemed very casual, but it caused everyone present to secretly feel their hearts racing. It was because, other than the Son of God, Caesar, no one present could see his actions clearly. This was especially so when he had kicked Tom out at the end. No one had been able to tell what he had done. However, Fong Xingjian continued to step on Tom with one foot and hold Tang Song up with one hand. He asked, "They aren't your people, right?" The Dark Knight shook his head. "That's good." With that, Fong Xingjian tapped out with a finger, and the all-conquering sword slashed out, unleashing a terrifying electromagnetic force. Under Fong Xingjian's comprehension, this slicing sword had already been mixed with a hint of the profoundness of electromagnetic forces. It could even slash out a knight's martial will from their physical body. It had also slashed out Tian Yi's will from the fifth prince's body and tossed it into a dog's body. Right now, when Fong Xingjian performed it once again, he tapped on Tom's body and slashed out a stream of black chi with a bang. That black chi had just appeared and was about to fly away when Fong Xingjian inhaled it through his nose. Tom's body suddenly trembled, and his face was filled with terror and despair. Even his limbs had become completely limp. What did you do? Where's my system? Where did my wolf god system go?" Fong Xingjian's earlier sword attack had clearly slashed out Tom's wolf god system from his will and then absorbed it himself. This was the latest progress that Fong Xingjian had made after his recent research on systems. He had improved further on the foundation of slashing martial will, which also meant that he had improved further on the degree at which he could control other people's systems. Right now, he was able to slash out systems and wills. However, after he absorbed a system, he could only obtain the knowledge and energy within it. He could not really use another system. It seemed that his knight's system would reject all of these. However, Fong Xingjian could also sense that as he absorbed his system, an endless amount of knowledge gushed into his brain. His knight's system seemed to have gone through some indescribable changes. All sorts of knowledge regarding werewolves, hellhounds, and ghost wolves gushed into his brain. However, Tom, whose system had been cut off, turned grim, and all his hopes turned to dust. He had only been an ordinary person to begin with, and he had only been able to achieve what he had today by relying on his system. To think that even his system had been cut off by Feng Xingjian. He was in so much despair that his heart was like dead ashes. He wailed out fiercely, hugged Feng Xingjian's calf, and said, "Please, please return my system to me. As long as you're willing to return my system to me, I'm willing to do anything. Please, please." At the sight of this scene, the countenances of everyone present changed drastically. Chapter 756. To all extraordinary humans, what was the most important thing to them? Power? Wealth? Their own power? None of those. Only their systems were what they valued the most. As long as their systems were still around, they would be able to regain everything even if they had nothing at all. As long as their systems were still around, they would have room for improvement and a brilliant future. Their systems represented hope. Now that his system had been cut off, Tom felt that he had completely lost all hope in life. In fact, Tom's wolf god system had only been cut off by Feng Xingjian. The werewolf's physique, the ghost wolf's physique, and the hellhound's physique that he had obtained from the system were still there. He still possessed his powers from before. However, this was useless. It was because without the system, he had lost all possibilities for improvement. After his system was cut off by Feng Xingjian, it was as if Tom's spine had been broken. He prostrated before Feng Xingjian and kept on pleading for Feng Xingjian to return his system to him. Relying on the system for a long period of time has brought me endless confidence and trump cards. However, it's also because of this that I crumbled faster than anyone else after my system was taken away. Looking at Tom, Feng Xingjian could not be bothered with him. He kicked out and sent Tom flying several tens of meters away, landing on the grass outside the hall. Outside the grass, the second-generation huge wolf, who had been captured by Feng Xingjian to be his guard dog, was prostrating on the ground. The people who had come and gone over the past few days had made him both excited and uneasy. He was excited because he was witnessing the Douglas family's annihilation. He was uneasy because he was afraid that he would also be within the attack range. I wonder how Master Tom is doing now? Just as this huge wolf was thinking about his previous master, Tom had already fallen onto the grass before him with a loud thud. The huge wolf's spirits rose, and he stood up. "Master, are you here to save me?" However, how could Tom possibly be bothered with him? Right now, his mind was filled with thoughts of his lost system. Almost at the moment he landed on the ground, Tom crawled over like a dog to the hall and continued to kneel before Feng Xingjian. The giant wolf followed Tom over and immediately saw a scene that left him in disbelief. My lord, Tom, on the other hand, lay on the ground and begged, "Please, return the system to me. I promise I'll never go against you or Douglas again. I'll do whatever you want me to do." When many extraordinary humans in the hall saw this, they were terrified. At the same time, they also felt sad for the death of a rabbit. They were all holders of systems. Even if they still had their own powers, they would still feel despair when they thought about losing their systems. However, this did not include the three heads of the Radiant Parliament and Cyrus. The three heads of the Radiant Parliament had firm wills and had grown for many years. They were powerful and had great potential even without their systems. Cyrus, on the other hand, hated his own system. However, the fact that Feng Xingjian had displayed the ability to deprive the system still caused the four of them to have mixed feelings. Out of everyone present, the one who was feeling the most terrified was probably Tang Song, who was still being held up by Feng Xingjian. Looking at Tom on the ground, Tang Song's mind was filled with despair. He thought of how it would be worse than death if his system were to be deprived as well. However, the government representative frowned tightly. Earlier, he had turned the prowess of the aircraft carrier fleet and nuclear weapons into a seething pressure. However, his prowess had been easily diluted by Feng Xingjian's series of actions. How could this be? He did not care about Feng Xingjian's extraordinary abilities. He had the Pacific Fleet, nuclear weapons, and the strongest son of God in the world of extraordinary powers, the Dark Knight and the Abyss Lord. How could he allow Feng Xingjian to turn the tables? Therefore, he stood out once again and said, Mr. Fong Xinjian, please don't change the topic. Right now, our Pacific Fleet has 6 aircraft carriers, 50,000 warriors, and several hundred battleships at sea outside Los Angeles. Everyone in Washington is united, and the intercontinental missiles equipped with nuclear warheads are already aimed here. As he spoke, he exhaled through his nostrils, raised his neck high, and said with an arrogant expression, "Mr. Fong, it all depends on whether we fight or surrender." Hearing his words, the atmosphere in the area became solemn again. Caesar spoke through the quantum communication device in his mind. Shouldn't we stop him? This guy probably doesn't care about Earth's military forces. If we were to infuriate him, the Dark Knight said, "There's no need for now. I've seen his actions during this period of time. This guy isn't a creature who likes to cause destruction and act recklessly. Instead, he's doing things one after another, and he seems to have some kind of goal. Let's just wait and see." The many ability users behind Fong Xinjian fell silent. Although Fong Xinjian had displayed the ability to seize systems, the Pacific Fleet and the nuclear weapons did not have systems for him to seize. This was the strongest military force of the strongest country on Earth. It was an ultimate power that could make anyone feel uneasy. The government representative raised his head high. Based on his past experience, the leaders of ordinary small countries and extraordinary humans would all be a loss of what to do and would have to bow down in submission. However, if it was really as the Dark Knight had said, that Fong Xinjian had abilities that were on par with Caesar, then he might not necessarily surrender. This was the most crucial moment. Would Fong Xinjian give in under the great pressure? He appeared extremely arrogant, but his eyes were fixed on Fong Xinjian, waiting for his reply. Even Tom and Tang Song were looking at Fong Xinjian nervously, waiting for Fong Xinjian's reply. A hint of hope flashed in Tang Song's eyes. If Fong Xinjian were to give in, then he would have a chance to live and keep his system. The Crimson Alliance's relationship with the United States had always been pretty good. Right now, the atmosphere was so heavy that it was as if water was going to come out. Everyone was silent as they waited for Fong Xinjian's reply. Fong Xinjian casually tossed Tang Song into a corner like he was tossing a toy. Tang Song did not dare to escape and merely stayed at the side, watching as Fong Xinjian walked to the hall's entrance under everyone's gaze. Fong Xinjian looked toward the sea in the west and said, "Your Pacific Fleet is in that direction, right?" The government official's brows twitched, and he suddenly had a bad premonition. He bellowed fiercely, "What are you thinking of doing? If you dare to start a war with our country, several hundred intercontinental missiles with nuclear warheads are ready to be launched. Our United States will definitely not fear battle." "Nothing much," Fong Xinjian said calmly. "I just haven't seen your Pacific Fleet before and want to see what it looks like." As he spoke, Fong Xinjian put out one hand, and in that instant his arm under the heaven-connecting sword physique swelled up abruptly. Back when Fong Xinjian was in the snowy mountains of the northern ice region, his physical body, which had been transformed from his martial will, had already swelled up to about 100,000 meters. Right now, how far could Fong Xinjian go? As Fong Xinjian put out one hand, his arm instantly stretched across the sky above Los Angeles, covering up the sunlight like a dark cloud that covered up the sky. Then it crossed the sea and headed toward the Pacific Fleet. Chapter 757. Wherever the palm passed by, the entire Los Angeles streets would be in an uproar. Countless cars on the streets came to a stop, and people from their homes, offices, and dance halls ran out. When they saw the sudden change in the sky, all of them turned pale. They could not even tell that this was an arm. They could only tell that something had blocked out the sky, causing the starlight and moonlight to disappear simultaneously. Oh my God, is this the end of the world? Could it be the military's newest weapon? The moon has disappeared. What on earth is going on? Putting aside the panic on the streets of Los Angeles, when the palm crossed a distance of several hundred kilometers and covered up the sky above the Pacific Fleet, the soldiers on the ships were not much better than ordinary people. What is that? Dark cloud? Is it a lunar eclipse? Prepare to fire. When the many battleships, aircraft carriers, and fighter aircrafts of the Pacific Fleet saw the huge palm that covered up the sky, many of the soldiers did not know what it was. Although the military's upper echelon did not know what it was, they immediately reacted and prepared for battle. Fire! Fire! Overwhelming firepower soared into the sky, smashing toward Feng Xingjian's descending palm. However, how big was Feng Xingjian's palm that was descending above the Pacific Fleet? Just the distance between his middle finger and the base of his palm was over 50 kilometers. When this palm landed, all the moonlight and starlight dissipated, and the world was plunged into darkness. As the palm pressed down, an overwhelming force descended from the sky as if the sky had collapsed. Just the act of the palm pressing down caused endless gales to collide with the surface of the sea, causing the entire surface of the sea to cave in. It even formed a tsunami that was over 3 meters tall and struck the United States west coast. All sorts of destroyers, battleships, and even aircraft carriers were sent swaying from side to side, and the people on the ships found it hard to even stand. The supersonic fighter aircrafts, helicopters, and unmanned surveillance aircrafts that took off in the sky were also like headless flies, flying all over the place amidst the strong gales. Many surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft cannons, and armor-piercing shells were fired explosively into the sky. There was no need for them to aim at all, as the entire sky had become the target of the attacks. Large areas of sparks exploded in the sky, just like a series of fireworks. Unfortunately, this flame was too small in the darkness, just like a candle on a field. Such an all-out attack did not harm the black shadow in the sky at all. The black shadow continued to descend inch by inch, completely unaffected by the firepower. God, what is this? What are we fighting against? An officer stared blankly at the sky, looking at the gradually descending black shadow, and said in a daze, "The sky is falling." It was true that the sky had collapsed. To the 50,000 warriors of the Pacific Fleet, this scene was no different from the sky collapsing. As the palm continued to press down, this unrivaled fleet of the United States, which had dominated the Pacific Ocean, suppressed Southeast Asia, the Indian Ocean, and Australia, finally collapsed completely. Countless people abandoned the warships and jumped into the sea. The pilots in the fighter jets also flew at full speed, trying to escape this bottomless darkness. However, at the next moment, violent martial will descended from the sky, shaking all of the Navy out of the ships and airplanes. All of them landed on the surface of the sea. As the 50,000 members of the Navy were sent flying into the sea, Feng Xingjian clenched his palm and grabbed all of the Pacific Fleet in his palm. Then Feng Xingjian pulled back his palm, pulling back his entire arm. The sky once again returned to normal. A large number of gasping commoners in Los Angeles and the 50,000 members of the Navy on the surface of the sea descended. At the entrance of the hall in Beverly Hills, Feng Xingjian pulled back his palm and turned around. He opened his palm, and the Pacific Fleet, which had been compressed by over 1,000 times, appeared in his palm. This was the steel of all the ships in the Pacific Fleet that Feng Xingjian had forcefully compressed with his unrivaled powers, forcefully compressing the ship's hull to 1,000 times its size. However, after being compressed 1,000 times by brute force, many of the structures inside, especially the engines, could no longer be preserved. Looking at the sparks rising from his palm, Feng Xingjian clenched his hand, holding the entire Pacific Fleet in his palm. Feng Xingjian said calmly, "It seems like it's going to explode." It was not just going to explode. The Pacific Fleet had many nuclear-powered battleships and submarines, and there were even miniature nuclear warheads in them, coupled with the firearms stored in them. If the entire Pacific Fleet were to explode, the prowess would be unimaginable to ordinary people. However, a muffled boom rang out from Feng Xingjian's palm. It was like a series of muffled thunder from the 9 heavens. Feng Xingjian's palm trembled slightly, and a puff of green smoke came out from his palm. When Feng Xingjian opened his palm once again, only ashes were left falling down from his palm. The Pacific Fleet had been completely wiped out. However, the people present had not seen the entire process. Therefore, most of them were still unable to react. The Dark Knight was the only one who had been connected to the artificial intelligence, Nicola, monitoring everything through countless spy satellites. He wore an astonished expression as he looked at Feng Xingjian and said, The thing in your hand earlier was the Pacific Fleet." Hearing that, everyone present was in disbelief. It was true that Feng Xingjian's palm had been very powerful earlier. However, to say that he had traversed a distance of several hundred kilometers and grabbed the Pacific Fleet in his hand, it was unbelievable, and everyone found it hard to accept this. However, Feng Xingjian nodded. "That's right." He looked at the government envoy and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't expect your fleet to be so fragile. I messed around with it a little and it was destroyed." Impossible. How could the government officials possibly believe something like this? To be able to grab the Pacific Fleet in the palm of his hand. It sounded like a myth no matter how one listened to it. How is this possible? Stop trying to mystify us. Feng Xingjian, do you really think that you'll be able to fool me with just this? At this moment, the official's phone rang. He had just picked it up when he heard a flurry of curses. What's going on? Was it Feng Xingjian who did this? Earlier, half of Los Angeles and several 10,000 kilometers of the sea level were covered up. The Pacific Fleet has disappeared. What on earth happened? The Dark Knight already knew the outcome. His gaze as he looked at Feng Xingjian was filled with a sense of helplessness. This move that Feng Xingjian had performed was not as powerful as the one that had happened on the sun. However, in terms of control and technique, it was at the pinnacle and unprecedented. The phone in the official's hand had long since slipped to the ground. His countenance was pale as he looked at Feng Xingjian, trembling. In the end, he sat down on the ground, looking as if he had lost his parents. Chapter 758. The United States Pacific Fleet was one of the United States' greatest trump cards. Only the heavens knew how many trillions of the United States' wealth had been depleted since the formation of this fleet. It could be said that it was because of this fleet that the United States had been able to look down on the several tens of small countries in Southeast Asia, the Indian Ocean, and so on. It had given the United States the confidence to dominate the world. However, right now, this Pacific Fleet had been wiped out by Feng Xingjian in an instant. This was equivalent to chopping off one of the United States' hands. Within a short period of time, many people in the government and the military who were in the no side as if they had lost their parents. In the hall of Beverly Hills, the United States ambassador, who had been acting high and mighty, was now sitting on the ground. His countenance was grim, and his eyes were lifeless. He no longer had the high spirits he had earlier. This ambassador was not the only one who was in such a state. All of the extraordinary humans in the surroundings were extremely shocked and fearful. Even the many extraordinary humans from the Douglas family who were on Feng Xingjian's side first felt terrified when they heard that Feng Xingjian had crushed the Pacific Fleet so easily. Tom seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant, and there were even strands of white hair growing on his head. With Feng Xingjian's performance, it was impossible for him to defeat Feng Xingjian even if he had the system in the future and was given another 10 years to develop, let alone now that he no longer had his system. Doesn't this mean that I'll never be able to get my wolf god system back in this lifetime? At the thought of this, Tom's countenance turned even grimmer. Tang Song, who had been tossed onto the ground by Feng Xingjian earlier, was also drenched in cold sweat. Earlier on, he had thought that if Feng Xingjian were to be suppressed by the United States, Feng Xingjian could still get the Crimson Alliance to use political means to save him through the United States government. However, after seeing what Feng Xingjian had done, Tang Song could no longer muster up any hope. He suddenly sat up straight, prostrated himself, and said in admiration, "Mr. Feng, please accept my bow. I'm willing to be your servant for life and serve you faithfully. I only hope that you can show mercy and forgive me for my disrespect." Elena looked at Tang Song, who was groveling on the ground, Tom, who had been beaten silly, and the United States ambassador, whose face was pale and who did not say a word. He couldn't help but let out a sigh in his heart. Invincible. Invincible. Invincible, undefeatable. If I could reach such a level in my lifetime, I would have no regrets even if I died. As for the senior officials of the United States, after receiving the specific information, they were also speechless. Even Caesar, the son of God, who used to be known as the strongest existence on Earth, had never displayed such a level of combat power. As for nuclear missiles, no one was foolish enough to deploy them. What use would nuclear missiles be if they could destroy the Pacific Fleet along with its nuclear-powered warships and submarines? They would only cause the people of Los Angeles to be plunged into misery and suffering. In a conference room in an underground fortification, Edward, the Minister of Defense, sighed helplessly. Give up. Send people to rescue those who are still at sea. As for Los Angeles, let's just pretend nothing happened. Hearing these words, the expressions of everyone present were extremely colorful. Some were sorrowful, some were terrified, some were angry, some were ashamed. A young general could not help but stand up and say, "We haven't lost yet. There are still many weapons that we haven't tried. If we were to retreat just like that, where will our United States national prestige be?" National prestige? Edward sighed and said, "We've already lost our national prestige since the moment Fong Xingjian destroyed the Pacific Fleet with a single slap." As he spoke, he turned to look at a white-haired professor at the side and asked, "Professor Ashley, have you calculated it? Roughly how much energy did Fong Xingjian use to achieve this?" It's roughly equivalent to the eruption of Mount St. Helens, or 10 times of a magnitude 8.0 earthquake. If such an attack were to be unleashed directly in Washington, it would be able to flatten the entire Washington residents. Hearing Professor Ashley's reply, everyone present was left speechless. Although they also felt that Fong Xingjian's attack was very amazing, they had never really calculated what kind of prowess it would take to achieve this. Now that they heard the results from the professor, no one else requested to continue the battle. A short moment later, a large number of troops retreated, and the government envoy who had fallen to the ground earlier also stood up. He bowed deeply toward Fong Xingjian and said, "Sir, I express my sincere apologies for my earlier rudeness. We're willing to compensate for all the losses we've brought you." This was what a politician was like. One moment ago, he would still be arrogant and domineering. However, at the next moment, he would be able to slap his own face in the face of threats and benefits, acting like a loyal dog. Fong Xingjian shook his head and said, "Scram. Don't come and bother me again." The envoy felt as if he had just been granted amnesty and quickly retreated. Right now, the Dark Knight and the other outsiders were the only ones left. Looking at the Dark Knight, Fong Xingjian asked, "Do you have anything else?" The Dark Knight's countenance was grim. To be honest, although he had already tried his best to overestimate Fong Xingjian's abilities, it seemed that he had still underestimated Fong Xingjian. Right now, he no longer had the confidence to win against Fong Xingjian, who he had prepared meticulously. Hearing Fong Xingjian's question, the Dark Knight said, "May I know what is your objective for coming to Earth?" Fong Xingjian walked out of the hall, looked at the bright moon in the sky, and said, "Nothing else. I'm just here to spread sword arts." The Dark Knight continued to ask, "Is it the sword arts that you've been spreading on television? It can stimulate superpowers in humans?" "That's right." The Dark Knight frowned and said, "If everyone possesses extraordinary powers, the entire world will become hell. The law will no longer have any restraints, and the government's authority will be at its lowest. The entire civilization will lose the power to advance. Is this what you want?" The Dark Knight's words were also the reason why he had been isolating extraordinary powers from the mortal world all this while. He had never allowed extraordinary humans to overly interfere with society, and he had also never allowed his black technology to flow into society. It was because, in his opinion, humanity's temperament and moral standards were still far from being ready to accept extraordinary powers. Fong Xingjian shook his head and said, "That won't happen. Everyone possesses extraordinary powers. It's just giving everyone a chance. The bad guys might become stronger, but the good guys will also become stronger." then what if the government monopolizes your sword arts? The Dark Knight asked another sharp question. Right now, the experts can completely monopolize the information regarding sword arts, making it impossible for commoners to cultivate them. What if that's the case? Feng Xingjian laughed and said, "If I want everyone in the world to know about my sword arts, then there won't be anyone in the world who doesn't know about it." As Feng Xingjian said this, the Dark Knight's gaze suddenly narrowed. It was because he followed Feng Xingjian's gaze and looked toward the sky. It was unknown when, but the originally clear moon had been covered up by densely packed black prints. The optical binoculars equipped with the armor instantly zoomed in, and the Dark Knight was able to see clearly that the black prints were densely packed words. As long as one took out a telescope and looked toward the moon, they would be able to see the words. On the moon, Feng Xingjian's actual body floated in midair. From the beginning to the end, what he had left behind in the villa had merely been a clone. Beneath his feet was a mountain range that stretched as far as the eyes could see. If one were to look down from the sky, they would be able to see that these protruding mountains were actually large words that had been carved out. Each of the words was like a tall building rising from the ground. Right now, a myriad of words were carved onto the surface of the moon, moving along with the circulation of the Earth-Moon system. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.